This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. I was always the practical one in my family, the one who looked for logical explanations when strange things happened. But what started with that old guitar in my bedroom 3 years ago has completely changed how I see the world. I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I grew up in Meadowbrook, this tiny rural town where everyone knows everyone else's business. There's not much to do here except hang out at the local diner or drive 40 minutes to the nearest mall. When I turned 18, I decided I wanted to learn how to play guitar. I thought it might help me stand out when applying to colleges the following year. You know, something interesting to put on applications besides just good grades. My mom had dated this guy named Rick for a few months about a year earlier. He was actually pretty decent compared to some of her other boyfriends. He played in a local band and had a whole collection of guitars. When my mom mentioned I wanted to learn, she called him up and he offered to loan me one of his older guitars. It was this beautiful vintage acoustic with yellowed ivory inlays and a deep, rich wood grain. He said it was from the 1960s and had belonged to his uncle. I remember being so excited when we picked it up. Rick showed me a few basic chords, but honestly, I was terrible at it. My fingers hurt like hell after trying to press down on the strings, and I couldn't make it sound anything like when he played it. Still, I brought it home and propped it up in the corner of my bedroom, promising myself I'd practice every day. But between school and my part-time job at the gas station, I barely touched it. For weeks, that guitar just sat there in the corner of my room, almost like it was watching me. I know that sounds weird, but that's how it felt sometimes when I'd look over at it, like it was waiting. Then, one night in October, about a month after I'd brought it home, I was sitting at my desk working on a history paper. It was around 11 at night, and the house was completely quiet. My mom was working the night shift at the hospital, and my grandma, who lives with us, was already asleep. Out of nowhere, the guitar just fell over, and not like it slipped down the wall or anything. It was like someone had pushed it. It crashed to the floor with this loud bang and a weird, discordant sound as the strings vibrated. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My heart was racing as I stared at it lying there on the floor. There was no breeze, no open window, no reason for it to fall. The spot where I kept it was perfectly flat against the wall. It had been standing there for weeks without any issues. I remember picking it up with shaking hands and examining it for damage. Finding none, I propped it back up, but this time I leaned it more securely against the wall. I told myself it must have been balanced poorly all along, and it had finally given way. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Something felt off about the whole thing. I tried to go back to my paper, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept glancing over at the guitar, half expecting it to move again. Eventually I gave up and went to bed, but I slept with my light on that night. The really freaky stuff happened a few days later. It was a Saturday morning, and I was eating cereal in the kitchen. My grandma had gone to use the bathroom down the hall, and my mom was still asleep after her night shift. The house was completely silent, except for the sound of my spoon against the bowl. Then I heard it. Clear as day, the sound of guitar strings being strummed, not just a random note or the sound of a string snapping. It was like someone had deliberately run their fingers across all the strings, playing a slow, deliberate stroke from top to bottom. The sound came from my bedroom, where the guitar was still propped in the corner. I froze mid-bite, my blood turning to ice. Before I could even process what was happening, my grandma came rushing into the kitchen, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unable to speak. The fact that she'd heard it too made it so much worse. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't the house settling. Something had played that guitar, and we'd both heard it. "Is someone in the house?" she whispered, clutching the doorframe. We both knew there wasn't. The front and back doors were locked, and all the windows were closed because it had been raining that morning. There was no way anyone could have gotten in without us knowing. I forced myself to get up from the table. My legs felt like jelly as I walked toward my bedroom, my grandma following close behind. When we reached my doorway, I flipped on the light. The guitar was exactly where I'd left it, leaning against the wall. Nothing in my room looked disturbed, but the air felt different. Heavier somehow, like the atmosphere before a storm. Maybe it was just the strings settling, I said, not believing my own words. My grandma didn't say anything, but I could tell by the look on her face that she didn't buy it either. We both knew what we'd heard. That same day, I called Rick and told him I wanted to return the guitar. I made up some excuse about not having time to practice. I didn't mention what had happened. I was afraid he'd think I was crazy or that I'd damaged his instrument somehow. When we dropped it off, Rick seemed disappointed but understanding. As he took the guitar from me, I felt this weird sense of relief, like I was getting rid of something dangerous, but also a strange reluctance, almost like it didn't want to leave me. "Take good care of it," I said, not sure why those words came out of my mouth. Rick gave me an odd look. "Always have," he replied. I thought that would be the end of it. With the guitar gone, things went back to normal for a while. No more unexplainable sounds, no more objects falling for no reason. I convinced myself it had all been coincidence, or maybe the old house playing tricks on us. But about 2 years later, when I was 20, something else happened that I still can't explain. I was in my bedroom one night, scrolling through my phone before going to sleep. It was around midnight, and everyone else in the house was already asleep. Suddenly, I got this overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone. It's hard to describe exactly what it felt like. It wasn't like hearing or seeing something concrete. It was this bone-deep certainty that someone was watching me. The feeling was so intense that I couldn't move. My whole body went cold, and I could feel sweat breaking out across my forehead and back. My phone slipped from my hand onto my chest as I lay there, too terrified to even turn my head to look around the room. The feeling of being watched was coming from the exact corner where the guitar used to stand. That same corner that had been empty for 2 years now. I lay there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, with my eyes fixed on the ceiling, afraid of what I might see if I looked toward that corner. The sense of dread was so thick I could barely breathe. It wasn't just fear, it was this absolute certainty that something was there, something that shouldn't be, and whatever it was focused entirely on me. I've never felt anything like it before or since. It was primal, the kind of fear that bypasses all rational thought. My mouth was dry and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Eventually, I gathered every ounce of courage I had and reached out to turn on my bedside lamp. The light flooded the room, revealing nothing. The corner was empty. The whole room was exactly as it should be, but the feeling didn't go away. Even with the lights on, I could feel it, this presence, this attention, fixed on me. I ended up sleeping on the couch in the living room that night, and for several nights after. I never told anyone about it because I knew how crazy it would sound. How do you explain being terrified of an empty corner? Then last year, when I was 21, things escalated even further. I experienced what I now know was sleep paralysis, but it was unlike anything I'd ever heard described. I woke up in the middle of the night, completely unable to move. It felt like there was an immense weight pressing down on my chest, pinning me to the bed. I tried to scream, to call out for help, but I couldn't make a sound. My mouth wouldn't open, my vocal cords wouldn't work, and then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of furniture being dragged across my bedroom floor. Not just a slight movement, but the heavy scraping of my dresser being pushed several feet. I could hear the wood groaning against the floorboards, the items on top of it rattling. I couldn't turn my head to look, couldn't do anything but lie there and listen in absolute terror as something invisible rearranged my furniture. The sound moved around the room, first the dresser, then my desk chair, then what sounded like my bookshelf being shoved against the wall. The episode probably only lasted about 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When it finally broke, when I could move again, I sat bolt upright and switched on my light, expecting to see my room in complete disarray. But everything was exactly where it should be. My dresser hadn't moved an inch. The chair was still tucked under my desk. The bookshelf was in the same spot it had been for years. Yet I had heard it so clearly. The sounds had been so real, so physical. I checked the floor for marks, thinking maybe the furniture had been moved and then put back, but there was nothing. No scratches on the hardwood, no indentations in the carpet. I sat awake for the rest of that night with all the lights on, trying to make sense of what had happened. Was it just a dream? Sleep paralysis can cause hallucinations, I know that, but it felt too real, too specific. And why would I hallucinate sounds of furniture moving? I can't help but think it's all connected somehow. The guitar falling, the mysterious strumming, the presence in my room, and now this, like whatever was attached to that guitar never really left when I returned it, like it found another way to make itself known. I've tried researching the history of the guitar, trying to find out if anyone else who owned it experienced similar things, but Rick doesn't know much about its past beyond his uncle. Sometimes I wonder if I should try to track it down again, to see if being near it would provide some answers. But another part of me is terrified of what might happen if I did. The thing that scares me most is that I don't know what's coming next. Each incident has been more intense than the last, more impossible to explain away. What happens when whatever this is decides that moving furniture isn't enough? What is it trying to tell me? What does it want? Story 2. I still can't sleep with the door open. It's been 15 years since we lived in that house on Macedonia Road in Willow Creek, North Carolina. But some habits stick with you when they're born from real terror. I was 12 when we moved there, and my brother Jeremy was 10. My parents found it for a steal, which should have been our first warning sign. It was this old farmhouse, probably built in the early 1900s, with peeling white paint and black shutters that never quite closed right. The house itself wasn't particularly large, but that hallway, that impossibly long hallway, was something else entirely. From the moment we moved in, something felt off about it. The hallway connected the living room to our bedrooms at the back of the house, and it always seemed longer than it should have been, like physically impossible given the outside dimensions of the house. I remember walking down it that first day and feeling like I was in one of those nightmares where you're running but never getting anywhere. My room was the second door on the right. Jeremy's was across from mine, and at the very end of the hallway hung this antique oval mirror in a tarnished brass frame. I hated that mirror from day one. It always seemed to catch movement when nothing was there. Mom seemed really anxious when we first moved in. She was constantly cleaning, rearranging furniture, burning sage, which she claimed was just for the smell. Dad worked long hours at the paper mill in the next town over, so he wasn't around much to notice the weird stuff that started happening almost immediately. It was about 3 weeks after we moved in when I had my first real encounter. I was taking a shower one evening while Mom was making dinner and Jeremy was playing video games in the living room. Our bathroom had this white shower curtain, nothing fancy, just a plain white curtain with a clear liner behind it. I was rinsing shampoo out of my hair, eyes closed, when I felt this pressure in the room. It's hard to explain, but it was like the air got heavy. I opened my eyes, and there on the outside of the curtain was a handprint, an adult-sized handprint, being dragged slowly across the curtain from left to right, not pressed against it like someone was leaning on it, but actually scraping across it like fingers dragging through fog on a window. I froze, completely froze. The water was still running over me, and I watched this handprint move all the way across the curtain, then disappear at the edge. I stood there for maybe another 30 seconds before I found the courage to turn off the water. I grabbed my towel from the hook beside the shower and wrapped it around myself without even drying off properly. I yanked the curtain open, certain someone would be standing there, but the bathroom was empty. The door was still locked from the inside, just as I'd left it. I got dressed in record time, my hands shaking so badly I could barely pull my shirt on. Then I bolted from the bathroom and ran down that horrible hallway to my bedroom. The hallway seemed even longer that night, stretching out before me like it was growing with each step. I slammed my bedroom door shut and locked it, then sat on my bed, hugging my knees to my chest. That's when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, stopping right outside my door. I held my breath, staring at the doorknob, praying it wouldn't turn. After what felt like an eternity, there was a knock. "Lily, you okay?" It was Jeremy. I nearly cried with relief. I opened the door to find my little brother standing there, looking confused. "Why'd you run past me like that? You look scared." I tried to explain what I'd seen, but even as I was saying it out loud, it sounded crazy. Jeremy didn't laugh, though. He just looked nervous and said, "I don't like this house either." That night, I slept with my desk chair propped under my doorknob. I didn't tell my parents about the handprint. Mom had been stressed about money, and Dad was always tired from work. Plus, I figured they'd just say I imagined it, or it was condensation or something. So I kept it to myself and tried to forget about it. But then, about a week later, Jeremy had his own experience. We were both in our rooms doing homework. Mom and Dad had fallen asleep watching TV in the living room. I could hear the faint sound of some game show through the walls. It was around 9 at night, and the house had that quiet stillness that comes after dark. Suddenly I heard Jeremy's door open and his footsteps hurrying across the hall to my room. He came in without knocking, his face pale. "Someone was knocking on my door," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Mom or Dad?" I asked. Though I already knew the answer, he shook his head. "They're both asleep in the living room. I just checked." He explained that he'd been sitting at his desk when he heard 3 loud, distinct knocks on his bedroom door. He'd called out, "Come in," but nobody entered. After a few seconds, he got up and opened the door himself, expecting to see one of our parents, but the hallway was completely empty. Here's the thing that still makes my skin crawl. That hallway was so long that there was no way anyone could have knocked and then disappeared in the time it took Jeremy to open the door. There were no alcoves, no closets, nowhere to hide, just that long straight hallway with the mirror at the end. We sat on my bed whispering about it for an hour, too scared to go back to his room. Eventually, we worked up the courage to tiptoe to the living room together. Sure enough, both our parents were fast asleep on the couch, Dad snoring slightly with his head tilted back. They'd clearly been there for a while. That night, Jeremy slept on my floor. The next morning, we tried to tell Mom about what had happened. She just gave us that patient smile parents use when they think you're being silly. "Old houses make noises, kids. The wood expands and contracts." "But Mom, it was knocking, like a person knocking," Jeremy insisted. She ruffled his hair. "Your imagination is working overtime. Maybe we should cut back on those scary movies." We didn't bother trying to convince her, but from then on, Jeremy and I both knew there was something wrong with that house, something malevolent. The incidents continued, small things at first, items that would move from where we left them, cold spots in rooms that should have been warm, the constant feeling of being watched. But the worst thing, the thing that still gives me nightmares, happened about 2 months after we moved in. I was walking down that hallway one evening, heading to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I tried to avoid looking at that mirror at the end. I developed a habit of keeping my eyes down when I walked past it. But something made me look up this time. In the reflection, I saw myself walking, but there was someone behind me, a woman, tall and thin, with long dark hair, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned white nightgown. She was maybe 10 feet behind me in the reflection, just standing there, watching me walk. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. The hallway behind me was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, it showed only me, standing alone and terrified. I ran to the living room where my parents were reading, my heart hammering in my chest. "There's someone in the house," I gasped. Dad immediately got up and checked every room, every closet, under every bed. He even went outside and walked around the property. Nothing. "Lily, there's no one here," he said when he came back in, looking concerned. "Are you feeling okay?" I wasn't crazy. I know what I saw, but how do you convince someone of something they're determined not to believe? After that night, Jeremy and I started researching the house and the land it was on. The local library had some old county records, and what we found made everything so much worse. Our house had been built on land that used to belong to the Macedonia family, hence the road name. Behind our property, deep in the woods, was an old family cemetery that had been there since the 18th century. Mom later admitted she knew about the cemetery but didn't tell us because she didn't want to put ideas in our heads. But the worst part wasn't the cemetery itself. It was learning that our house, our actual house, had been built by a Macedonia descendant named Thomas in 1912. According to a local history book, Thomas had gone insane after his wife died in childbirth, along with their baby. He'd built the house with that unnaturally long hallway because he believed it would confuse evil spirits and keep them from finding his next wife. Thomas himself died in the house in 1927. They found him hanging from the ceiling at the end of that hallway, right where the mirror now hung. We only stayed in that house for 6 more months after discovering this history. Dad got transferred to another branch of the paper mill in a town about 50 miles away, and we moved without much fuss. I don't think even our parents were sad to leave. Over the years, we lived in 3 other houses across North Carolina that I'm convinced were haunted in their own ways. But nothing compares to that house on Macedonia Road with its impossible hallway and that cursed mirror. Sometimes I dream about it. In my dreams, I'm walking down that hallway again, and it keeps stretching longer and longer before me. The mirror at the end gets farther away instead of closer, and behind me, always just out of sight, I hear footsteps following, waiting. I've never gone back to Willow Creek. I never will, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I can feel that same heavy pressure in the air that I felt in the shower that day. And I know somehow that whatever was in that house is still there, still walking that endless hallway, still watching from behind that tarnished mirror. Story 3. I still can't explain what happened that night at Marcus's house. It's been over 10 years, and I get goosebumps every time I think about it. I've never written this down before, but I need to get it off my chest. I met Marcus when we were about 13, right at the end of middle school. We clicked instantly, both into the same video games, same music, same sense of humor. By high school, we were basically inseparable. His mom worked nights at the hospital as a nurse, so I'd stay over at his place almost every weekend. It was our routine: pizza, video games, and staying up way too late. Their house was this old 2-story in Westfield. Nothing fancy, just a normal suburban home built probably in the 70s or 80s. The only weird thing about it was that it sat directly across from Fairview Cemetery, like you could see the headstones from their living room window. Marcus always joked that they got the house cheap because of the spooky neighbor discount. From the very first time I stayed over, I noticed things were off about that house. Little stuff at first. You'd hear knocks in the walls that didn't sound like pipes. Floorboards would creak in empty rooms. Sometimes I'd swear I heard footsteps going up the stairs when everyone was already upstairs. Marcus and his family were pretty casual about it. His mom would just shrug and say, "That's just the house settling." But the look in her eyes told me she knew it wasn't. His older brother Jake, who was a senior when we were sophomores, would just roll his eyes whenever we mentioned anything weird. "You guys are being babies," he'd say. "This house has been making noise since we moved in when I was 10. After a while, we kind of got used to it too. It became background noise. Creepy, sure, but harmless. We'd hear a thump upstairs and just glance at each other like, there it goes again. It never felt threatening, just present. Until that night in sophomore year. It was a Friday in October. Not Halloween or anything spooky like that, just a regular autumn weekend. Jake had some big football game that afternoon, and he was exhausted when he got home. He barely said 2 words to us before grabbing some leftover pizza and heading upstairs around 9. Marcus and I stayed in the living room playing this fighting game we were obsessed with at the time. His mom was working the overnight shift as usual, so we had the downstairs to ourselves. We were planning to crash on this big L-shaped couch in the living room, like we always did. Around 1 in the morning, we finally got tired of gaming and decided to call it a night. Marcus went to brush his teeth first, and I started setting up our sleeping spots on the couch. I was laying out blankets when I heard the floor creak in the hallway upstairs. This wasn't unusual. The house made noise all the time, but then I heard something else, a sort of moaning sound. Not scary like a ghost in a movie, but more like someone who was half asleep and disoriented. I glanced toward the stairs and saw Jake at the top of the hallway. He was wearing gray sweatpants and no shirt, his hair messy like he'd just woken up. He shuffled across the hallway toward the bathroom, moving slowly like he was still half asleep. I figured he was just getting up to use the bathroom, nothing weird about that. Marcus came back from brushing his teeth and I nodded toward the stairs. "Your brother's up," I said, not breaking my gaze from the hallway. I was waiting to hear the bathroom door close or the light switch flip on. "What?" Marcus asked, grabbing his blanket and flopping onto his side of the couch. "Jake, he just went into the bathroom," I said, still staring at the hallway. But I realized something odd. I hadn't heard the bathroom door close or the light switch click. The hallway was still dark. "He's probably sleepwalking again," Marcus mumbled, already getting comfortable. He used to do that a lot when we were kids. I waited another minute, but still didn't hear any sounds from the bathroom. No water running, no toilet flushing, nothing. "I'm gonna check on him," I said, getting up. "It's weird he didn't turn the light on." Marcus just grunted, already half asleep. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and called up, "Jake, you okay, man?" No response. I climbed the stairs slowly. The wood creaked under my feet, but otherwise the house was completely silent. When I reached the top, I saw that the bathroom door was slightly open, but it was dark inside. "Jake?" I called again, pushing the door open a bit more. No answer. I flipped on the light switch. The bathroom was empty. A chill ran down my spine. I distinctly remembered seeing Jake walk toward this bathroom. I had watched him the entire time, and I never saw him leave, but he wasn't there. "Jake?" I called again, a bit louder this time. I heard movement from behind his bedroom door, which was across the hall from the bathroom. I crossed the hallway and knocked lightly. "Jake, you in there?" There was a muffled groan, then Jake's sleepy voice. "What? Yeah. What's up?" My heart started pounding. I opened his door slowly and peeked in. Jake was in his bed, covers pulled up to his chest, looking like he'd just been woken up. His phone showed it was 1:15 in the morning. "Were you just in the bathroom?" I asked, my voice sounding strange even to myself. Jake squinted at me, confused. "No, man, I've been asleep since like 9:30. What's going on?" I stood there frozen. I just saw you walk from your room to the bathroom, like 30 seconds ago." Jake sat up now, more alert. "What? Dude, I've been asleep for hours. You probably saw Marcus." "No," I said firmly. "Marcus is downstairs. I was talking to him while I watched you, or someone who looked exactly like you, walk to the bathroom. Gray sweatpants, no shirt, messy hair." Jake's face went pale. He lifted his covers slightly to reveal he was wearing black basketball shorts and a white t-shirt. "Dylan, I haven't gotten up once since I went to bed," he said, his voice dead serious. "I felt like the floor was tilting beneath me. But I saw you. I never looked away from the hallway. I watched you walk to the bathroom, and you never came out. But you're here. You've been here the whole time." Jake didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he just shook his head. I don't know what to tell you, man. It wasn't me." I backed out of his room slowly and practically ran down the stairs. Marcus was sitting up on the couch now, looking concerned. "What's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, then immediately regretted his choice of words when he saw my expression. I told him everything. How I'd seen Jake walk to the bathroom, how I never took my eyes off the hallway, how Jake had been in his bed the whole time. As I spoke, Marcus's face grew increasingly troubled. "We've had weird stuff happen here before," he said quietly when I finished. but never anything like seeing someone who wasn't there. We barely slept that night. We kept the TV on, volume low, just for the comfort of the light and sound. Every creak, every settling noise of the house made us both jump. I kept glancing at the stairs, half expecting to see Jake, or whatever looked like Jake, standing there watching us. The next morning, in the harsh light of day, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe I dozed off for a second without realizing it. Maybe it was a trick of the shadows and my tired mind. Jake himself suggested that maybe I'd seen his reflection in the glass of a picture frame in the hallway. But I know what I saw. I was wide awake, and I never looked away from that hallway. Someone, something, that looked exactly like Jake walked to that bathroom and simply vanished. We never really talked about it much after that weekend. It was too unsettling, and none of us had any explanation that made sense. Marcus and I still hung out all the time, but I noticed we spent more weekends at my house after that night. When we did stay at his place, we kept all the lights on much longer than we used to. The strangest part? About a month later, Jake mentioned that some of his clothes had been moved around in his dresser. Specifically, his gray sweatpants weren't where he normally kept them. Marcus and I just looked at each other and changed the subject. I've tried to convince myself over the years that there's some logical explanation, but the truth is, I know exactly what I saw that night. I saw someone, or something, that looked exactly like Jake, wearing clothes Jake owned but wasn't wearing, walking through a hallway in the middle of the night, while the real Jake was sound asleep in his bed. And to this day, I have no idea what it was or why it happened. I just know that whenever I think about staying in a house across from a cemetery, my answer is always going to be a hard no. Story 4. I've been sitting on this experience for almost 7 years now, and it still makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. I don't talk about it much. Honestly, who would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. This happened when I was in 4th grade at Westbrook Elementary. I was 9 years old, sitting in Ms. Pearson's class on the 2nd floor. Our classroom was pretty cool because 2 of the walls were basically giant windows. One wall faced the playground and soccer field, and the other looked out toward the parking lot and the streets beyond. On clear days, you could see all the way to the water tower on the edge of town. It was early May, around 1:30 in the afternoon. I remember because we always had independent work time right after lunch, and the sun would hit our classroom at this weird angle that made the whiteboard glare. We were supposed to be working on some math problems, long division, I think, but I was having trouble focusing. I've always been a daydreamer. My mom says I've got my head in the clouds more often than not. That day was no different. I remember staring out the window, watching some birds fly by, my pencil tapping against my unfinished worksheet. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a plane. We had a small regional airport about 20 miles outside of Westbrook, so seeing aircraft wasn't unusual, but immediately, something felt wrong. This thing wasn't moving like a plane. It was gliding too smoothly, too deliberately. As it got closer, I could see it wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. The craft was dark gray, almost charcoal, but with this weird metallic sheen that seemed to shift colors slightly as it moved. It wasn't the classic saucer shape you see in movies, but more like someone had taken that shape and stretched it out. It had these long, fin-like wings, one extending from each side and another jutting up from the top. The whole thing was sleek and aerodynamic, but in a way that didn't make sense for anything I knew could fly. What really freaked me out were the windows. They wrapped around the middle section in a band, but they were so dark, like impossibly black. I couldn't see anything behind them, but I had this horrible feeling that something was looking out at me. The strangest part, it made absolutely no sound. None, not even a whisper. Every plane I'd ever seen made some kind of noise, a distant rumble, a jet engine roar, something. This thing was completely silent as it cruised by, maybe 100 yards from our classroom windows. I remember my heart pounding against my ribs. I felt dizzy, like I might throw up. Part of me wanted to scream or point or do something, but I was frozen. Not physically frozen. I could move, but paralyzed by disbelief. I turned to look at Madison, who sat next to me, to see if she was seeing this too. That's when I noticed something was terribly wrong with the classroom. Everyone, and I mean everyone, had their heads down. Not like they were working on their math problems or reading. Their heads were hanging down in this unnatural way, chins against their chests, arms limp at their sides or dangling off their desks. Miss Pearson was at her desk the same way, her reading glasses still perched on her nose, but her head hanging down like a puppet with cut strings. They looked switched off. That's the only way I can describe it, like they were robots and someone had hit the power button. They weren't unconscious exactly. Their eyes were open, but there was nobody home behind those eyes. I remember calling out, "Madison?" My voice sounded so small in the silent classroom. No response, just the tick-tick-tick of the wall clock. I looked back out the window, and the craft was still there, seeming to hover right outside our building. I swear it had moved closer, though I don't remember seeing it move. It was just there, closer than before. My stomach lurched and I felt this pressure building in my head, like when you dive too deep in a swimming pool. The air felt thick, charged, like right before a thunderstorm, but inside the classroom. I blinked, my eyes watering from staring so hard, and in that split second, it was gone. Just gone. Not like it flew away or disappeared into the distance. It vanished. One moment filling my vision outside the window, the next, nothing but blue sky and clouds. That should have been impossible. From our second-floor classroom, we had a clear view for miles. I would have seen it fly away in any direction, but it didn't. It just ceased to exist. Before I could even process what had happened, the bell rang for recess. I nearly jumped out of my skin at the sound. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, everyone in the class suddenly animated again. Heads came up, conversations resumed mid-sentence, chairs scraped against the floor as kids got up. It was like someone had pressed pause on the entire room except for me, and then hit play again. No one seemed to notice anything was wrong. No one acted like they'd just spent the last few minutes frozen like mannequins. Ms. Pearson clapped her hands and said, "All right, everyone, line up for recess," in her normal cheerful voice. Madison turned to me and asked if I wanted to play foursquare like nothing had happened. I felt sick, really sick. My hands were shaking and I was covered in cold sweat. I remember asking Madison, "Did you see that? Outside the window?" She just gave me this confused look and said, "See what?" The thing. The aircraft," I stammered. She laughed and said I was being weird again, but I couldn't let it go. As we filed out to the playground, I kept asking other kids if they'd seen anything strange. Everyone either looked at me like I was crazy or just ignored me. During recess, I kept looking up at the sky, expecting to see the craft return. The playground supervisor, Mrs. Henley, noticed me standing alone and asked if I felt sick. I guess I looked it. I almost told her what happened, but something stopped me. Some instinct told me that adults wouldn't believe me either, that they might think there was something wrong with me. The rest of the day was a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. My teacher asked me twice if I needed to go to the nurse. I just kept thinking about those few minutes when everyone seemed shut down, and that craft silently watching us through those black windows. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that gray craft outside the window. I kept wondering what would have happened if I had looked down too, like everyone else. Would I have frozen? Would I remember anything at all? The next day at school, I tried one more time to talk to Madison about it. She just rolled her eyes and told me to stop making up stories. After that, I stopped bringing it up, but I never stopped thinking about it. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares. In them, I'd be sitting in class, and suddenly everyone's heads would drop down. Then those dark windows would press right against our classroom, and I'd feel something pulling me toward them, something wanting me to look into that impossible darkness. I'd wake up gasping for air, convinced there was something hovering outside my bedroom window. Over time, the nightmares faded, but the memory never did. I'm 16 now, a junior in high school, and I still get a chill when I walk past my old elementary school. I still look up when I hear planes overhead, half expecting to see that silent gray craft. I've researched UFO sightings in Westbrook since then. There have been a few reports over the years, strange lights, unexplained objects, but nothing matching what I saw. Nothing mentioning people freezing in place. Sometimes I wonder if it was all in my head. Maybe I dozed off during independent work time and had some vivid dream, but it felt so real. The metallic sheen of the craft, the unnatural stillness of my classmates, the pressure in my head. These details are still crystal clear to me 7 years later. The strangest part is how normal everything was afterward. No missing time, no mysterious marks, none of the stuff you hear about with alien encounters. Just me, with a memory no one else shares. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was some experimental military aircraft and some kind of electromagnetic field that affected everyone but me. Maybe I had some kind of seizure that made me hallucinate, but deep down I know what I saw was real. Why was I the only one who didn't freeze? What would have happened if that craft had stayed longer? Were they studying us, watching me? These questions keep me up at night sometimes. I've never told my parents or my current friends about this. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw that day in 4th grade. Something was watching us. Something that could somehow affect everyone but me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my room at night, I get this feeling that it's still out there, still watching, maybe waiting to return. And the worst part, I don't think I'll ever know why. Story 5. I've never told this story to anyone outside my immediate family. I'm not even sure why I'm writing it down now. Maybe I just need someone else to know what's been happening to me, to tell me I'm not going crazy. I've been living with this for over 20 years, and I'm at the end of my rope. I was 12 when we moved to Pinewood. It's this tiny town in Massachusetts where everyone knows everyone else's business. My parents fell in love with this old farmhouse built back in 1860. It was everything they wanted. Lots of land, old world charm, and way cheaper than anything we could afford back in Boston. I remember my mom going on about the original hardwood floors and my dad excited about the barn he could convert into a workshop. But I hated it from day one. The moment we pulled into the driveway, I got this weird feeling in my stomach. Not excitement like my parents, but dread. When they showed me which bedroom would be mine, the one at the end of the upstairs hallway, I actually started crying. I couldn't explain why. There was nothing obviously wrong with it. It was bigger than my old room, had these beautiful bay windows, and even a window seat I could read on, but something about it just felt wrong. My parents chalked it up to me being dramatic about the move. I was 12, leaving all my friends behind. Of course I was upset, so I tried to make the best of it. I decorated my walls with posters, arranged my books on the shelves, and tried to ignore the constant feeling that I wasn't supposed to be in there. For the first couple of years, I managed. I slept with my light on, which my parents hated because of the electric bill, but it was the only way I could fall asleep. I never told them that every night I'd wake up at least once feeling like someone was watching me. I'd scan the room, heart pounding, before convincing myself it was just my imagination. Then when I was 14, things got worse. I started noticing a pattern. Every night around 11 p.m., the temperature in my room would drop. Not dramatically, but enough that I'd need to grab an extra blanket. And with the cold came this overwhelming feeling that I needed to leave. It's hard to describe, like when you walk into a room where people have been arguing and can feel the tension, except multiplied by 100. The weirdest part was that my friends noticed it too. My best friend Jessica would be over, and we'd be hanging out in my room, and right around 11, she'd suddenly say something like, "Maybe we should go downstairs and watch TV?" Or, "Is it getting cold in here?" Once, my friend Mike was helping me with homework, and at 11 sharp, he stood up and said, "I think I should head home now." When I pointed out it was only 11 and his curfew wasn't until midnight, he couldn't explain why he felt he needed to leave. I started making excuses to be downstairs by 11. I'd tell my parents I wanted a snack or needed to finish homework at the kitchen table, anything to avoid being in that room when that feeling came. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in October, about 2 years after we'd moved in. I had a huge history test the next day and had fallen asleep while studying. I woke up suddenly, that familiar sense of being watched pulling me from sleep. The clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m. The room was freezing. I remember lying there, paralyzed with fear, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. That's when I saw her. An elderly woman was standing at the foot of my bed. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned nightgown, her white hair loose around her shoulders, but it was her face that made my blood run cold. She was smiling down at me, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was hungry, like she'd been waiting for me. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. I just lay there, my heart threatening to burst from my chest as she stood there smiling that terrible smile. Then, slowly, she began to fade. Not like she was walking away, but like she was dissolving into the darkness. The last thing to disappear was that smile. The moment she was gone, I bolted from my bed and ran to my parents' room. I was hysterical, babbling about the woman in my room. My dad checked the entire house, but of course he found nothing. My mom held me while I sobbed, probably thinking I'd had a nightmare, but I knew what I'd seen. For weeks after that, I refused to sleep in my room. I'd camp out on the couch or sneak into my parents' room after they fell asleep. They were getting frustrated with me, thinking I was being irrational. They even took me to a therapist who suggested I was just dealing with anxiety about the move 2 years later and prescribed some techniques to help me face my fears. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the energy in my room disappeared. The cold spots, the feeling of being watched, the sense of unwelcome, all gone. I cautiously moved back into my room, and for about 1.5 years, things were normal. I actually started to convince myself that maybe it had all been in my head. I was 16 when it started again. One night, right at 11, that familiar cold settled over my room. The feeling of being unwelcome returned, stronger than before. But this time, I was older, and I wasn't going to be scared out of my own space. I'd read about sage cleansing online and convinced my mom to buy me some, claiming it was for a school project. The first few times I burned sage in my room, it seemed to help. The feeling would subside, and I could sleep peacefully. I developed a routine. Whenever the cold would come, I'd light my sage bundle and walk around the room, focusing on the corners and the closet especially. This worked for a while, but about 2 months ago, everything changed again. I was doing my usual sage ritual. It was 11:15, and the feeling in my room was particularly intense that night. I lit the sage bundle, but it wouldn't catch properly. It kept sputtering out. After several attempts, it suddenly erupted into flame, way more than it should have. And when I blew on it to get it smoking properly, the smoke blew in the opposite direction, against my breath, like something was pushing it away. That's when I heard it, a low chuckle from the hallway. I dropped the sage and spun around. There was nothing there, but I could have sworn I saw something duck around the corner by the stairwell, just a flash of movement. That was the last night I slept in my room. Since then, things have escalated in ways I never imagined possible. Whatever is in this house isn't confined to my bedroom anymore. It's following me. I'll be watching TV in the living room and catch glimpses of something in my peripheral vision. A dark, human-shaped figure standing in the doorway to the kitchen. When I turn to look directly at it, it's gone. I'll be making dinner and feel someone standing right behind me, breath on my neck. But when I turn around, there's nothing there. The worst is at night. I've been sleeping on the couch for months now, but I don't really sleep. I doze fitfully, jerking awake at every creak and groan of the house. Sometimes I wake up feeling pressure on my chest, like someone is sitting on me. Once I woke up to find all the kitchen cabinets open, though I know they were closed when I went to sleep. Last week I was in the bathroom and caught a glimpse of someone in the mirror behind me. That same elderly woman, still smiling that terrible smile. I screamed and turned around, but of course there was no one there. When I looked back at the mirror, I saw words written in the condensation from my shower. My house. I immediately wiped it away and ran downstairs. My parents think I'm losing it. They've suggested maybe I should talk to someone again. Their code for therapy. They don't see what I see. They don't feel what I feel. Or if they do, they're in denial about it. I've tried researching the history of the house, but records from 1860 are spotty at best. All I could find was that it was built by a Joseph Merrick, who lived here with his family until 1923, when the property was sold after his death. There's no record of any tragic deaths or reasons why the place might be haunted, but I know what I've experienced. I know that something is in this house, something that started in my bedroom but has now spread throughout the entire home. Something that doesn't want me here. I'm 34 years old now. I should have my own place, my own life. But I'm still here, still trapped in this nightmare. My parents think I'm staying because I can't afford my own place. Partly true, Pinewood doesn't exactly have a booming job market, but the real reason is that I'm terrified of what might happen if I try to leave, like it might follow me. Last night was the worst yet. I fell asleep on the couch around midnight and woke up at 3:17, the exact same time I saw her all those years ago. The living room was ice cold. I could see my breath, and there she was, standing at the foot of the couch, looking down at me with that same hungry smile. But this time, she spoke. "You've stayed too long." Her voice was like dry leaves rustling, barely audible. I lay there, frozen in terror, as she slowly reached out one bony hand toward my face. Just before she touched me, she vanished. Not gradually like before, but instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. I'm writing this now because I don't know what else to do. I can't keep living like this, jumping at shadows, sleeping with all the lights on, wondering when she'll appear again and what she'll do next time. But I also can't seem to leave. Every time I think about moving out, I'm overwhelmed with dread, like something terrible will happen if I try. Whatever is in this house has been with me for most of my life now, and I'm afraid it's getting tired of waiting. Story 6. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened 3 nights ago. I've barely slept since then. Every time my phone rings, I nearly jump out of my skin. I'm writing this down, partly to get it off my chest and partly because I'm starting to question my own sanity. For context, I'm a junior at Westfield University, living in Oakwood Hall in a single dorm. After sharing with a nightmare roommate freshman year, I scraped together the extra money for a single, and it's been worth every penny. At least it was until now. My ex James and I broke up about 6 months ago. It wasn't particularly dramatic. We just realized we wanted different things. He was talking about settling down in Westfield after graduation, while I'm planning to move to Chicago for grad school. The breakup hurt, but we tried to stay friendly at first. That didn't last long. After a few awkward coffee meetups, we both silently agreed to just move on. We hadn't spoken in over 2 months when this happened. It was a Tuesday night, and I was up late finishing a paper for my abnormal psychology class. Ironic, given what I'm about to describe. I remember checking the time on my laptop, 12:45 in the morning, and thinking I should wrap up soon. I had an 8 a.m. class the next day, and I was already running on fumes from midterms. When I finally closed my laptop, I plugged in my phone to charge overnight. That's when I noticed a missed call from James from about an hour earlier. No voicemail, no text, just a missed call at 11:38 p.m. I remember feeling annoyed. Why would he call me that late on a weeknight? Whatever it was, it could wait until morning if I decided to call him back at all. I set my alarm, put my phone face down on my nightstand, and crashed into bed. I must have fallen asleep almost instantly. The next thing I remember is waking up to murmuring voices. At first, I thought it was coming from the hallway or maybe the room next door, but as I became more alert, I realized the sound was coming from inside my room. Not loud, but definitely there, like someone having a heated conversation in hushed tones. I opened my eyes but stayed completely still. My room was dark, except for a blue-white glow coming from my nightstand. My phone screen was illuminated. I slowly turned my head to look at it, and that's when I saw it. My phone was in an active call with James. The call timer was running at 34 minutes and counting. I froze, completely froze. I hadn't called James. I'd been asleep for hours, and the weirdest part, I could still hear that murmuring coming from the phone, like multiple people having a muffled argument. I glanced at the time displayed at the top of my screen, 3:27 a.m. I want to make it clear that I'm not the type of person who sleepwalks or does things in their sleep. I've never had any history of that, and I definitely wouldn't have called my ex-boyfriend in the middle of the night. For what felt like forever, I just lay there, unable to move. It was like my body was stuck, but my mind was racing. Was someone in my room who had used my phone? Had I somehow called him in my sleep? Was James pranking me somehow? Eventually, I managed to reach out and pick up my phone. As soon as I touched it, the murmuring stopped. The call was still connected, but now there was just silence. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "James?" There was no response at first, and then I heard breathing. Not heavy or creepy breathing like in horror movies, just normal breathing like someone was there listening. "James, is that you? Why are you calling me at this hour?" I asked, trying to sound more annoyed than terrified. "You called me," he finally said. His voice sounded off, distant somehow, or like he was speaking through some kind of filter. "No, I didn't. I was asleep," I replied. "Then how have we been talking for the past half hour?" he asked. My blood ran cold. "We haven't been talking. I just woke up and found my phone in a call with you." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "You don't remember what you just told me?" I sat up in bed, fully awake now and seriously freaked out. "James, I was asleep. I didn't call you. I didn't say anything to you." "You said you missed me," he continued, his voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. "You said you made a mistake. You said you wanted to see me." "That wasn't me," I insisted, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Listen, it's the middle of the night. We can talk about this tomorrow, okay?" That's when he said it, in a tone that made my skin crawl, like I'd be there by tomorrow. Before I could respond, the call ended. Just like that, I sat there in the dark, clutching my phone, trying to process what had just happened. After a few minutes, I turned on my bedside lamp and checked my call log. There was no record of any call to or from James. Not the missed call from 11:38 p.m., not the 30-something minute call that had just ended. Nothing. I checked my recent calls again and again. Nothing from James. I even looked through my contacts to make sure I was looking for the right number. I was. Sleep was out of the question after that. I turned on all the lights in my room and sat up until morning, jumping at every little sound. When my alarm went off at 7, I was already dressed and ready to leave my room. Once I was on campus with people around, I felt a little calmer. I decided to call James between classes to figure out what the hell had happened. I found a quiet corner in the student center and dialed his number, my hand still shaking slightly. He picked up after a few rings. "Lena, is everything okay?" His voice sounded normal this time, the James I knew, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. "Did you call me last night?" I asked without preamble. "No," he said, sounding confused. "Why would I call you?" "What about around 3 a.m.? Were you on the phone with me?" "At 3 in the morning? No way. I was asleep. What's going on?" I felt sick. "So we didn't have a conversation in the middle of the night? You didn't say anything about me claiming I missed you or made a mistake?" "Lena, what are you talking about? I haven't spoken to you in weeks." I tried to keep my voice steady as I recounted what had happened. The missed call, waking up to find my phone in an active call with him, the strange conversation, his ominous parting words. "And now there's no record of any of it in my call log," I finished. There was a long pause before James responded. "I don't know what to tell you. I didn't call you and you didn't call me, at least not that I'm aware of. Maybe you had a really vivid dream." "It wasn't a dream," I insisted. I was wide awake. I saw the call timer running. "Look, I don't know what happened, but it wasn't me. I was asleep from around 11 until my alarm went off at 7. My phone was on my desk across the room. I can even check my call log if you want, but I'm telling you, there won't be anything there. He was right. When he texted me a screenshot of his call history a few minutes later, there were no calls to or from me. That's when I remembered something that made this whole situation even more disturbing. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, though it had never been this extreme before. A couple of times over the past few months, I'd woken up to find my phone in the middle of a call, usually to a random contact, sometimes to a number not even in my contacts. Each time, I'd assumed I'd accidentally dialed while half asleep, or that my phone had glitched. I'd hang up quickly and go back to sleep, dismissing it as nothing serious. But now, I'm not so sure. The thing that's really freaking me out is what James supposedly said at the end, like I'd be there by tomorrow. What does that even mean? It sounded threatening, but it also didn't sound like something James would say. I've checked my phone for malware or anything suspicious. Nothing. I've made sure my dorm room door is locked and that no one could have gotten in while I was sleeping. I've even asked my RA if anyone had been looking for me or asking about me recently. Nothing out of the ordinary. Last night I stayed at my friend Kayla's place because I couldn't face sleeping in my room alone. I didn't tell her the whole story, just that I was having trouble sleeping. I also turned my phone completely off before going to bed, but I can't avoid my room or keep my phone off forever. I have to figure out what's happening. Is my phone somehow connecting to calls on its own? Is someone hacking into my phone remotely? Or is something more unexplainable going on? The rational part of me wants to believe there's a logical explanation, that I was sleepwalking or that my phone glitched or that I dreamed the whole thing. But I know what I experienced. I was awake. The call was real, and those murmuring voices, I can still hear them when I close my eyes. What scares me the most is the possibility that it might happen again. What if next time, whatever or whoever was on the other end of that call decides to do more than just talk? What if, like I'd be there by tomorrow, meant something I don't want to understand? I'm writing this all down because I need someone to believe me. I need to know I'm not losing my mind. And maybe, just maybe, someone else has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. For now, I've changed my phone number and I'm staying with Kayla again tonight, but I can't shake the feeling that changing my number won't matter. Whatever reached out to me that night will find another way to make contact. I just hope I'm wrong. Story 7. I've been debating whether to share this for months now, but I need to get it off my chest. This happened last year, in 2022, when we took a trip to Tijuana. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My boyfriend Carlos, our 3-year-old son Miguel and I live in San Diego, and we occasionally cross the border to visit my family in TJ. This particular weekend was supposed to be just another regular visit, but everything went wrong from the start. It was pouring rain when we crossed over, some of the worst weather I'd seen in a long time. The streets were flooding and traffic was at a standstill. By the time we made it into the city, it was already getting dark. We tried calling my parents, but the storm had knocked out cell service in their neighborhood. With no way to reach them and the roads becoming more dangerous by the minute, we decided to find a hotel for the night. After driving around for almost an hour, we finally found this place called Hotel Frontera. It wasn't fancy, but it looked decent enough from the outside, just a typical 3-story building with those flickering neon signs. The lobby was small with outdated furniture, but at that point we were just grateful to find somewhere dry to stay. The front desk guy, who looked like he hadn't slept in days, told us they only had one room left. I was relieved until we actually got to it. The room was on the 3rd floor, and as soon as he opened the door, we were hit with this wall of hot, stuffy air. The AC was clearly broken, and the small window wouldn't open more than a few inches. "We can't stay here," I told Carlos in Spanish. "Miguel will never sleep in this heat." The clerk seemed annoyed when we went back downstairs to complain, but I wasn't backing down. My son was already cranky from the long drive, and there was no way I was going to make him sleep in what felt like a sauna. After some back and forth, and me threatening to leave, the clerk finally checked his computer again and miraculously found another available room. "It's on the 1st floor," he said, not looking up from his screen. next to the maintenance closet. Some guests complain about noise, but it's all we have left. At that point, I would have taken anything with functioning air conditioning. He handed us the key, an actual metal key, not a key card, and pointed us toward a hallway at the far end of the building. The room was at the very end of a dimly lit corridor, right next to a door marked Mantenimiento and what looked like an emergency exit. Inside, it was basic but clean. 2 full-sized beds with faded floral bedspreads, a small TV, and a bathroom with those tiny complimentary soaps. The AC was working, thank God, and after our ordeal, that's all I cared about. We got Miguel ready for bed and he fell asleep almost immediately in the bed closest to the window. Carlos and I decided to watch some TV before turning in. Around 11, Carlos started dozing off, so I switched off the TV and the lights and tried to get some sleep too. That's when I first noticed the sounds. At first, I thought it was just people in the next room. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy, maybe a chair, across a wooden floor, but there was something off about it. The drag would stop, then I'd hear a soft thump against the wall behind our headboard, then silence for a few seconds before another drag and thump. I nudged Carlos, but he was completely out. The guy can sleep through anything, I swear. I tried to ignore it, figuring whoever was next door would eventually go to bed. After about 20 minutes, I needed to use the bathroom. As soon as I got out of bed, the sounds stopped completely. I stood there for a moment, just listening, but there was nothing. I figured whoever was making the noise had heard me moving around and decided to be more considerate. The bathroom was right next to the headboard wall, and while I was in there, I pressed my ear against the wall, curious about our neighbors. But I couldn't hear anything at all, which seemed strange considering how clearly I'd heard the dragging just minutes before. When I got back into bed, the noises started again, but they were different now. The dragging sound was faster, more urgent somehow, and the thumps against the wall were harder, like someone was deliberately hitting it. That's when I started to get really uneasy. Something about the rhythm of it felt intentional, like whatever was making that noise knew I was listening. Then I heard it, a soft, muffled sound that made my skin crawl. It was weeping. Not loud sobbing, but that quiet, breathy kind of crying that someone does when they're trying not to be heard. It was coming from the same spot as the thumping, right behind our headboard. I sat up and stared at the wall. The weeping continued, but now it seemed to be moving. I swear I could track the sound as it moved up the wall, toward the ceiling, then down toward the foot of our bed. The entire time there was this scraping sound accompanying it, like fingernails dragging slowly across the wall. I reached over to wake Carlos, but before my hand touched him, I saw something that made me freeze. There at the foot of our bed, barely visible in the dim light coming through the curtains, was what looked like a round shadow peeking over the edge of the mattress. It was darker than the darkness around it, if that makes any sense. I blinked hard, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or my imagination running wild. When I looked again, the shadow was gone. Relief washed over me for just a second before I noticed movement by the bathroom door. The same roundish shadow was slowly peeking out from behind the door frame. I could only see part of it, what looked like the curve of a head, but there was no mistaking it for anything else. As I stared, it seemed to realize I was watching and quickly disappeared back behind the door. I couldn't move. It was like my body had completely shut down from fear. I wanted to scream, to wake Carlos, to grab Miguel and run, but I was paralyzed. All I could do was pull the sheets over my head like a terrified child and pray that whatever was in our room would go away. Under the covers, the sounds became more intense. The thuds on the wall were faster now, scattered and unpredictable. They seemed to be moving all around the room, on the walls, the ceiling, even under the bed. The weeping grew louder too, changing from quiet sobs to a kind of keening sound that made my chest tight. I don't know how long I stayed like that, trembling under the sheets, my eyes squeezed shut. It could have been minutes or hours. Every second felt like an eternity. My mind kept creating horrible images of what might be waiting when I finally looked. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see, had to know if my family was safe. Slowly, I lowered the sheet just enough to peek out. That's when it happened. A loud, screeching sob erupted right next to my ear, so close I could feel the breath of it on my skin. I screamed and jerked away so violently that I fell out of bed, landing hard on the floor. I scrambled back up, heart pounding, and dove under the covers again. Carlos woke up briefly when I screamed. He mumbled something about having a nightmare and put his arm around me. I tried to tell him what was happening, but I was so terrified I could barely speak. He just patted my shoulder and fell back asleep within seconds. I spent the rest of the night huddled against him, wide awake and listening. The sounds continued for at least another hour, the dragging, the thumping, the weeping, but they gradually became more distant, as if whatever was making them was moving away. By the time the first light of dawn appeared through the curtains, everything was quiet. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but too wired to sleep. While Carlos got Miguel ready for breakfast, I examined the room. In the daylight, it looked completely normal, no sign of anything unusual. The walls were solid, no strange markings or damage that might explain the sounds. What really freaked me out, though, was what I discovered when I stepped into the hallway. I wanted to see what room was behind ours, to maybe catch a glimpse of whoever had been making those noises. But there was no room there, just the maintenance closet on one side and the exit door on the other. I even asked the front desk clerk about the layout, pretending I was just curious. "Is there another guest room behind room 115? I asked. He looked at me strangely before shaking his head. "No, Senora, that's an exterior wall. There's just the parking lot on the other side." I felt sick. The sounds I'd heard couldn't have come from outside. They were too clear, too close, and they definitely couldn't have come from the maintenance closet, which was locked and obviously unused based on the dust accumulated on the doorknob. During breakfast, I tried to casually ask Carlos if he'd heard anything strange during the night. He mentioned hearing me yell at one point, but said he'd been too tired to really wake up. "You were really restless," he said, sipping his coffee. "Kept tossing and turning. Bad dreams." I didn't tell him what I'd experienced. Even now, months later, I haven't told anyone the full story until writing this. We left the hotel that morning and made it to my parents' place without any further incidents. The rest of our trip was normal, but I haven't been able to forget what happened in that room. I've researched the hotel online, looking for similar experiences, but found nothing specific. I even called anonymously once to ask if room 115 had any history, but the person who answered just laughed and hung up. I don't know what was in that room with us that night. I don't know how to explain the sounds coming from a wall that supposedly faced the outside, or the shadow I saw, or that terrible scream right next to my ear. All I know is that I'm never staying at that hotel again, and whenever we visit Tijuana now, I make sure we have confirmed accommodations with my family before we cross the border. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I still hear that soft weeping, and I still check the bathroom door before turning out the lights, just to make sure nothing is peeking around the corner, watching me from the darkness. Story 8. I still can't believe what happened that summer at my Aunt Patricia's house. I was 19 at the time, staying with her family in Oak Ridge while working a summer job at the local hardware store. It's been 15 years, but I still get chills thinking about it. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family because, honestly, who would believe me? It was a Thursday night in July, the kind of hot, sticky night where you can't get comfortable no matter how many times you flip your pillow. I was in the guest bedroom on the ground floor, scrolling through my phone with the window cracked open to catch whatever sad excuse for a breeze might come through. The clock on my nightstand read 11:37. And I remember thinking I should probably get some sleep since I had an early shift the next day. That's when I felt it. Not heard, not saw. I felt something watching me. You know that sensation that crawls up your spine when you're being stared at? It was like that, but 10 times more intense. I looked up from my phone and nearly pissed myself. There, outside my window, was a shadow. Not just any shadow. A figure. Tall, impossibly tall. Its head reached the very top of the window frame, which had to be at least 7 feet off the ground. I froze, my thumb hovering over my phone screen, afraid to move. The worst part? It was staring right at me. I couldn't see eyes exactly, but I knew it was looking at me. I just knew. For what felt like forever, but was probably only 15 seconds, we locked in this messed up staring contest. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Then it moved, just turned and walked away, toward the backyard. No sound, no footsteps crunching on the gravel path that ran alongside the house. Nothing. I'd love to say I was brave and immediately called for help, but the truth is, I sat there trembling for a good 5 minutes, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe I was more tired than I thought, but I knew what I saw. Eventually, curiosity won out over fear. Stupid, I know. I grabbed my lighter and cigarettes, don't tell my mom, and decided to check it out. I figured it was probably just some creep, and I should at least alert my Uncle Robert, who was a pretty intimidating guy with a shotgun collection. I slipped out through the kitchen door to the back porch, trying to make as little noise as possible. The security light above the back door cast just enough glow to see the outline of the yard, the shed, and the fence line. I lit a cigarette with shaking hands, hoping the nicotine would calm me down. That's when I saw it again. From the corner of the yard, near where the property line met the neighbor's fence, something moved. At first, I thought it was just shadows from the trees, but no, it was the figure. Now that it was farther from the house, I could see it better in the ambient light. It had to be 7 or 8 feet tall, dressed in what looked like flowing black robes with a hood pulled up, obscuring its face. The way it moved wasn't right. It took these long, gliding strides along the fence line, covering more ground than should be possible with each step. It was like watching someone on fast forward, but smooth, unnaturally smooth. It disappeared behind the shed at the far end of the yard. My cigarette dropped from my mouth. I backed up against the kitchen door, fumbling for the handle with sweaty hands. When I finally got inside, I was hyperventilating. "Uncle Robert," I called out, not caring if I woke the whole house. "Uncle Robert, there's someone in the backyard." Uncle Robert came downstairs in his boxers and t-shirt, looking confused and annoyed. Aunt Patricia was right behind him, pulling a robe around herself. "What the hell, Marcus?" Uncle Robert grumbled. "Do you know what time it is?" "There's someone out there," I insisted, pointing toward the back door, like a really tall person. "They were outside my window and now they're behind the shed." Timothy, my 12-year-old cousin, appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" "Stay up there, Tim," Aunt Patricia said sharply. But of course he didn't listen and came down anyway. Uncle Robert's face hardened. He went to the closet by the front door and pulled out a baseball bat. "Show me," he said. The 4 of us went to the back door. I was shaking so bad I could barely walk. "Where did you see them?" Uncle Robert asked, scanning the yard. "By the shed," I whispered, pointing. "They were walking along the fence and went behind it." Uncle Robert flipped on the floodlights that illuminated the entire backyard. Everything looked normal, too normal. "I'm going out there," he said, gripping the bat. "Pat, call the police if you hear anything." "No!" I grabbed his arm. "Don't go out there, please." He shrugged me off. "It's probably just some teenager messing around." Before I could stop him, he stepped onto the porch, with me, Aunt Patricia, and Timothy following behind. Uncle Robert walked a few yards into the yard and stopped. "Hey!" he shouted. "Whoever's out there, you're trespassing on private property. Get the hell out now or I'm calling the cops." His voice echoed in the night. For a second, nothing happened. Then the figure emerged from behind the shed. It didn't walk out. It sort of glided, like it was floating just above the ground. The black robes didn't move with the breeze like fabric should, and it was coming straight toward us. Aunt Patricia screamed. Uncle Robert raised the bat, but I could see his hands trembling. "Get back inside," he yelled, backing up toward the porch. "Now!" We all turned and scrambled for the door. In the chaos, Timothy tripped on the porch steps. I grabbed him by the collar and yanked him inside just as Uncle Robert slammed the door shut and locked it. That's when I looked back through the glass pane in the door and saw its face, or rather, the absence of a face. Where features should have been, There was just darkness. Not shadow, not a mask, but a void, a nothingness that seemed to absorb the light around it. Aunt Patricia was already on the phone with the police, her voice high-pitched and panicked. Uncle Robert had his back against the door, the bat still clutched in his white-knuckled grip. Timothy was crying silently, and I was just standing there, unable to look away from the thing in the yard. It had stopped about 20 feet from the house, standing perfectly still, watching us. The police arrived 12 minutes later. By then, whatever it was had disappeared again. The officers searched the yard, the shed, and even walked the perimeter of the neighborhood. They found nothing, no footprints, no disturbed plants or fence panels, nothing. Probably just some kids pulling a prank, one officer said, not very convincingly. We'll keep an eye on the area tonight, but there's not much else we can do without evidence. They left after about an hour. We were all still too wired to sleep, so we sat in the living room with all the lights on, barely talking. Uncle Robert kept getting up to check the windows and doors. At around 3 in the morning, Timothy pointed at the kitchen window and started screaming. It was back, closer to the house this time. Standing in the middle of the yard, its hooded head tilted slightly to one side like it was curious about us. Uncle Robert grabbed the phone and called the police again. By the time they arrived, faster this time, maybe 15 minutes, it was gone. Again. The officers were clearly annoyed, thinking we were crying wolf. They did another quick search but found nothing. One of them suggested we might want to lay off the late-night horror movies before they left. We didn't see it again that night. Nobody slept. We just sat there until dawn broke, jumping at every creak and shadow. I moved out of my aunt and uncle's house 2 weeks later, finding a room to rent closer to my job. I told them it was to save on commute time, but we all knew the real reason. Timothy started sleeping in his parents' room and didn't stop for months. Uncle Robert installed more security lights and cameras around the property, but they never caught anything unusual. For years, I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was someone on stilts playing a sick joke. Maybe it was some kind of shared hallucination brought on by suggestion and fear. Maybe I saw something that night by my window and my brain filled in the rest. But deep down, I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't human. The thing that really messes with me happened just last year. I was back in Oak Ridge for a friend's wedding and drove past my aunt and uncle's old house. They moved to Arizona 5 years ago. I felt compelled to stop and look at the place. The new owners weren't home, so I just stood on the sidewalk staring at the house and the slice of backyard I could see from the side. Something about seeing that yard again triggered a full-blown panic attack, my first ever. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, felt like I was dying right there on the sidewalk. A neighbor came out and helped me, probably thinking I was having a heart attack. When I finally calmed down enough to drive away, I realized something that still haunts me. In all those years, I'd convinced myself I had exaggerated the height of the figure in my memory. But standing there, looking at the actual house, I could see the window of my old room. The top of the frame was easily 7 feet high. Whatever was looking in at me that night was real, and it was exactly as tall as I remembered. I still don't know what it was or why it came to that house on that night. But sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can feel eyes on me again, and I wonder if someday I'll look up and see that hooded figure standing over my bed, finally ready to finish whatever it started 15 years ago in Oak Ridge. Story 9. I can't believe I'm finally sharing this. It happened about 2 months ago, but it still makes my skin crawl thinking about it. My boyfriend Mark and I are both into night photography and hiking, so we often plan these late-night adventures to capture stars or just explore places when they're empty of tourists. That night, we decided to check out Riverstone Falls Trail. For context, Riverstone is this gorgeous mountain trail about an hour from where we live. It's famous for this stunning waterfall and a cave with glow worms. During the day, it's packed with families and tourists, which is why we thought going super late at night would give us some privacy and maybe better photos of the glowworms without all the phone lights and chatter. We arrived at the parking lot around 2:30 in the morning. It was that deep kind of dark you only get in remote areas where your headlights seem to disappear into nothing. The moment I stepped out of the car, something felt off. I'm not usually the anxious type, especially not outdoors, but there was this immediate heaviness in the air. Mark was busy grabbing our backpacks with water, snacks, and camera gear, completely unbothered while I stood there feeling like I was being watched. "Ready?" he asked, handing me my flashlight. I nodded, not wanting to sound stupid by saying I was suddenly scared of a trail we'd hiked multiple times before, just never at this hour. The trail starts with this wooden boardwalk that cuts through dense bush before opening up to the mountain path. Our flashlights created these weird, long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Every few steps, I kept hearing what sounded like footsteps in the bush beside us, soft crunches, twigs snapping. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Mark. "Probably just possums or something," he said, shining his light into the bush briefly. "This place is full of wildlife at night." I tried to convince myself he was right. Still, I couldn't shake this growing sense of dread. The farther we walked, the more I felt like something was following us. I kept looking behind us so much that Mark started teasing me. "If you keep turning around, you're going to trip and fall on your face," he laughed. I feel like someone's there," I admitted. Mark stopped and did a dramatic sweep with his flashlight. "See? Nothing. Just us and the spooky forest noises." We continued walking. The trail narrows as you get closer to the falls, with steep drops on one side. We could hear the waterfall getting louder, which meant we were getting close. Usually this would be exciting, but that night each step felt wrong, like I was walking somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. About 15 minutes in, we reached the wooden stairs that lead down to the waterfall viewing platform. During the day, this is where everyone stops to take photos. At night, with just our flashlights illuminating the wet, mossy steps, it looked treacherous. The river below sounded angrier than I remembered, louder somehow. Mark was a few steps ahead of me when he suddenly stopped, and that's when it happened. Clear as day, right next to my ear, a woman's voice said, "Stop!" It wasn't shouted or aggressive. It was firm, almost like a mother warning a child, but there was absolutely no one else there. I froze, my whole body going cold despite the mild night. The voice felt so real, so close, I could almost feel the breath on my ear. Before I could even process it or tell Mark, he turned around with a weird expression on his face. "Maybe we should head back," he said, looking past me up the trail we'd just come down. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Hear what?" A voice, a woman's voice saying stop. His face changed. "No, but I just got this really bad feeling, like we shouldn't go down there." He pointed toward the platform. "Plus, the river sounds really high. We could get trapped if it's flooded the lower path." I was relieved he wanted to turn back, but terrified by what I'd heard. As we started heading back up the trail, we both heard it. This weird clicking sound coming from behind us. Not like an animal or insect, more mechanical, almost like someone rapidly pressing a camera shutter or clicking their tongue, but louder. We sped up, not running, but definitely walking faster than normal. The clicking followed, sometimes sounding closer, sometimes farther away. Mark, who had been so calm earlier, kept looking over his shoulder. At one point he looked back and stumbled into me so hard we both nearly went down. What did you see?" I hissed, grabbing his arm to steady us. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Just nothing. Let's keep moving." The way back felt 3 times longer than the way in. Every shadow seemed to move, and that clicking sound followed us almost to the parking lot before suddenly stopping. We practically threw ourselves into the car, and Mark started the engine with shaking hands. As we drove away, I finally asked, "What did you see back there when you almost knocked us over?" Mark was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "I don't know exactly. It was just a shape. But it was tall and it didn't move right." "What does that mean?" I pressed. "It moved too fast. 1 second it wasn't there, and then it was, like it skipped the space in between." He shook his head. "I probably just scared myself. It was dark." But I knew he didn't believe that, and I knew what I'd heard was real. The next day I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I started researching Riverstone Falls online. That's when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Over the past 20 years, 5 people have died there, all of them at the waterfall. Apparently, despite the warning signs, people sometimes jump from the top of the falls into the pool below. When the water level is high, like it was that night, there are dangerous currents and submerged rocks. The most recent death was a young woman just 3 years ago. She'd gone there with friends at night, ignored the signs, and jumped. They never found her body. I called Mark immediately and told him what I'd found. There was a long silence before he said, "Maybe that voice was trying to protect you, us." The thought had crossed my mind too. Was that voice warning us away from danger? But what about the clicking? The shape Mark saw. Those didn't feel protective. They felt menacing. We've tried to rationalize it since then. Maybe the voice was the wind or water playing tricks. Maybe the clicking was some nocturnal bird or insect we couldn't identify. Maybe the shape was just shadows from our flashlights. But deep down, I know better. Something was there with us that night. Something that didn't want us near that waterfall. I've avoided talking about this with anyone else because I know how it sounds, but I haven't been able to shake the feeling that we narrowly escaped something terrible. Mark suggested going back during the day with some friends, saying it would help demystify the experience. I refused. Some rational part of me knows it's just a trail, just a waterfall, but the memory of that voice, so clear and close, "Stop," makes me certain I'm never setting foot on Riverstone Falls Trail again, day or night. I still have nightmares about it. In them, I'm always alone on that trail, and the voice keeps saying, "Stop," over and over, getting more desperate each time. But in the dreams, I don't listen. I keep walking toward the falls, and just as I reach the platform, I wake up in a cold sweat. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has experienced something similar there. If that voice has warned others away from danger, or if whatever was following us that night is still there, waiting. I check the local news sometimes, dreading the day I might see a headline about another death at Riverstone Falls. I used to think ghost stories were just that, stories. Now, I'm not so sure. Whatever was on that trail with us that night, it wasn't human, and it definitely wasn't just in our heads. Story 10. I never wanted to share this online, but I need to get it out somehow. It's been over 13 years, and I still can't explain what happened to my family back in Schwartz Creek. Maybe writing it down will help me process it. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but every word of this is true. It all started in 2007 when my dad, Ronald, began looking really yellow. We kept telling him to see a doctor, but he was stubborn as hell. By the time he finally went, the diagnosis hit us like a truck: aggressive pancreatic liver cancer. Dad was always the rock of our family. 6'2", built like a linebacker, never sick a day in his life. Seeing him suddenly so fragile was terrifying. Then, just a month later, my sister Shira started feeling these lumps in her neck. I remember sitting in the waiting room while Mom took her to get checked out. When they came back, Mom's face was blank, like she'd shut down completely. Hodgkin's lymphoma. My little sister was only 17. I'll never forget that night. Dad sat us all down. Me, my brother Ronnie, my younger sister Sabrina, and Mom. He looked at Shira and made this promise that broke my heart. "I'm not going anywhere until you're better," he said, not crying, just stating a fact, like he could bargain with death. The next 2 years were a blur of hospital visits, the smell of antiseptic, and watching 2 people I loved most waste away in front of me. Shira lost her beautiful long hair. Dad lost nearly 80 pounds. Our house became this strange place full of medication schedules and hushed conversations. Then in early 2009, something incredible happened. Shira went into remission. The doctors couldn't believe how well she'd responded to treatment. We were cautiously celebrating, even though Dad was getting worse. He died on March 27, 2009. It was like he'd been holding on by sheer willpower until Shira was okay. He kept his promise. I was 23, living in Washington State, but I flew home immediately. Those funeral days are hazy in my memory. The parade of casseroles from neighbors, the weird small talk with relatives we barely knew sorting through Dad's things. I had to go back to Washington for work, but I called home every day. Shira seemed to be doing okay physically, but she was quieter. She and Dad had always been especially close. Then, about 6 months after Dad died, I got this call from Shira. It was around 11 at night my time, so I knew something was wrong. "Chelsea?" Her voice was shaking so bad I could barely understand her. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I just saw Dad." My whole body went cold. "What do you mean?" "I was in the kitchen getting water and he was just standing there." She was crying now. By the sink, with his head down. "Chelsea," he was crying. I tried to rationalize it. It was probably just a shadow, or it was him. He looked up at me, then he was gone. She was hyperventilating. I'm scared to be alone in the house. I stayed on the phone until Mom got home from her late shift. I told myself it was grief, maybe a hallucination from the medication she was still on. I didn't want to believe it was anything else. 2 weeks later, Shira collapsed at home. The cancer was back, and it was everywhere. Her lungs, her liver, her bones. It happened so fast, the doctors said it was one of the most aggressive recurrences they'd ever seen. I flew home immediately, seeing her in that hospital bed. She didn't even look like my sister anymore. She was so swollen from the treatments, and they had to put in a breathing tube. She couldn't talk, but she kept using her phone to text us. 3 days before she died, something happened that I still can't explain. I was sitting with her while Ronnie went to get coffee. She suddenly became agitated, pointing to the corner of the room near the window. She grabbed her phone and typed, "Dad's here." I felt this chill run through me. "What?" She typed again. "Dad and Grandpa are here. Heaven is real. God is real." Grandpa had died back in 2001. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as the morphine talking, but she was so lucid, so certain. Ronnie came back and she showed him the same message. "What do they want?" he asked, his voice cracking. She pointed at herself, then typed, "They're waiting for me." 24 hours later, on September 20th, 2009, Shira died. She was 19 years old. I wasn't there. I had to fly back to Washington to pack up my apartment since I'd decided to move home to help Mom. The guilt of not being there still eats at me. That night, I was exhausted from packing and talking on the phone with family all day about Shira's condition. I accidentally fell asleep on my couch around 8 p.m., still in my clothes. I had this dream, the kind that feels more real than reality. Dad was standing in my apartment. He looked healthy again, like before he got sick. Next to him was our cousin Jennifer, who had died from a heroin overdose just 2 months before Dad passed. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with these peaceful expressions. "Dad?" I said in the dream. He nodded. "Shira's with us now, Chelsea. She's okay." I woke up with a jolt, my heart racing. The clock said 8:47 p.m. My phone started ringing almost immediately. It was Ronnie. "Chelsea," his voice broke. "She's gone." I later found out Shira had died at 8:45 p.m., just minutes before I woke up from that dream. The next few months were a nightmare. Mom seemed to age 10 years overnight. Ronnie started drinking heavily. Sabrina, who was only 15, became withdrawn and silent. I moved back home, taking over Dad's old home office to run my freelance business. Then came January 10th, 2010. Mom was working another night shift at the hospital. Ronnie was staying at a friend's place. It was just me and Sabrina at home. She'd been having nightmares, so she asked if she could sleep in Mom's bed with me. I said yes, of course. I remember checking that the space heater in Mom's room was turned off before we went to bed around 10 p.m. It was freezing that January, below zero outside with heavy snow. We both fell asleep quickly. I don't know what time it was when I heard it. A woman's voice, clear as day, saying my name, "Chelsea." Just once, but loud enough to wake me instantly. I opened my eyes and immediately smelled smoke. The room was filled with it, so thick I could barely see. I shook Sabrina awake, and we both started coughing immediately. "We need to get out," I gasped, pulling her out of bed. The smoke was so dense that we couldn't see the doorway. I remembered from some safety video to stay low, so we crawled across the floor. The heat was intense, and I could hear crackling coming from somewhere in the house. We somehow made it to the hallway, but I got disoriented. The smoke was even thicker there, and I couldn't tell which way led to the stairs. Sabrina was panicking, clinging to my arm. That's when I heard it again. The same woman's voice coming from my right. "This way." I didn't question it. I pulled Sabrina in that direction and we found the top of the stairs. We half crawled, half fell down them, then somehow made it to the front door. My lungs were burning and Sabrina was barely conscious by the time we got outside into the snow. Our neighbors saw us and called 911. The firefighters arrived, but it was too late to save the house. They said the fire had started from an electrical issue in the wall behind the living room, nowhere near the space heater I'd worried about. At the hospital, the doctor who treated us for smoke inhalation said something I'll never forget. "You girls had maybe 30 seconds left before the smoke would have killed you. Someone was watching over you tonight." I didn't tell anyone about the voice that woke me up. Who would believe me? But I know what I heard, and I know that if I hadn't woken up exactly when I did, Sabrina and I would have died in that fire. We lost everything in that house. All the photos of Dad and Shira, all their belongings we'd been keeping. It was like they were erased twice. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night sometimes. I recognize that voice that woke me up. It wasn't Mom's or Shira's. It was Jennifer's voice, our cousin, who I'd seen with Dad in my dream the night Shira died. I don't know what to make of any of this. I'm not particularly religious, and I've always been skeptical about ghosts and afterlife stuff. But I can't explain how Shira saw Dad before her cancer came back, or how I dreamed about Shira's death at almost the exact moment it happened, or how a voice I recognized saved me and Sabrina from that fire. Sometimes I think maybe Dad kept his promise in ways we couldn't understand. He said he wouldn't leave until Shira was better. Maybe he came back for her when it was her time, and maybe they're both still watching over us somehow. I don't have answers, I just know what happened. And 13 years later, I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear someone calling my name. Story 11. I've never really told this story in full before. I mean, I've mentioned bits and pieces to a few people over the years, but they usually just laugh it off or think I'm exaggerating. But what happened that night at Carswell Air Force Base housing still bothers me, even though it was almost 15 years ago now. I need to get this off my chest, I guess. Some background. I was 16 at the time, and my friend Jake's dad was stationed at Carswell AFB in Texas. Jake lived in this old housing unit on base with his mom and dad. The houses there were built back in the 50s or 60s, all identical, kind of run down, with small fenced yards backing up to communal alleys. The base itself had this weird vibe. There were always rumors about high suicide rates among personnel stationed there. Jake said at least 3 people had killed themselves in the housing area just in the 2 years his family had lived there. His mom would talk about hearing crying sometimes at night when nobody was around. She wasn't even superstitious, she just matter-of-factly mentioned it like she was talking about the weather. Anyway, it was a Friday in mid-July, and our friend group, me, Jake, Melissa, and Devin, had planned this overnight hangout at Jake's place since his parents were supposed to be away for the weekend. Except his mom's trip got canceled last minute, but she was cool and said we could still all stay over as long as we didn't do anything stupid. She was planning to go to her sister's place across town for the night anyway. It started out like any normal teenage hangout. We ordered pizza, played video games, watched some stupid horror movie, ironically, given what would happen later. Around 11 p.m. we were all sitting in Jake's living room when we heard this weird tapping at the back door. Not loud, just persistent. "What's that?" Melissa asked, looking toward the kitchen where the glass patio door was. Jake got up to check, probably just a tree branch or something. I followed him to the kitchen, and that's when I saw her. This girl, couldn't have been older than 12 or 13, standing on the patio staring in at us. The security light had triggered so we could see her clearly. Her face, I'll never forget it. It was all cut up, with these thin, precise lines across her cheeks and forehead. Not bleeding, just cut, like someone had taken a razor and made dozens of tiny slices. "Holy shit," Jake whispered. "Do you see that?" I nodded, too stunned to speak. "Guys, what is it?" Devon called from the living room. "There's a girl outside," Jake said, his voice shaking a little. Melissa and Devon came into the kitchen then, and we all stared out at this girl. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there staring in at us with these empty eyes. I remember thinking she looked too still, like she wasn't even breathing. "Should we call someone?" Melissa asked. "She looks hurt." Jake reached for the patio door handle, but I grabbed his arm. Something didn't feel right. "Wait," I said. "Let's call your mom first." We looked away for maybe 30 seconds to find Jake's phone. When we looked back, the girl had moved. She wasn't by the door anymore. She was at the very back of the patio, right up against the fence, still facing us, still completely motionless. "How did she move that fast without making any noise?" Devin whispered. None of us had an answer. We didn't hear footsteps, didn't see her walk. She was just suddenly in a different spot. Jake called his mom, who said she'd come right back. While we waited, none of us wanted to go near the patio door. We kept the lights on in the kitchen and just watched this girl, who never moved, never blinked, just stared in at us with those dead eyes. About 20 minutes later, Jake's mom pulled up. She'd brought her boyfriend's German Shepherd with her, this massive dog named Rex that was usually super friendly but trained as a guard dog. The moment they came in through the front door, Rex started acting weird. He ran straight to the kitchen, hackles raised, and stood facing the patio door. Jake's mom looked out and frowned. "I don't see anyone," she said. We all rushed over. The girl was gone. "She was just there," Melissa insisted. "A girl with cuts all over her face." Jake's mom looked concerned, but not exactly surprised. She opened the patio door and let Rex out into the yard. The dog immediately went to where the girl had been standing and started sniffing frantically. Then he moved to the fence and began this strange behavior, pacing side to side, growling low in his throat, but not barking. His eyes were fixed on something beyond the fence in the alley. "Rex doesn't like it back there," Jake's mom said quietly. "Never has. He refuses to go in the alley behind the house." She called the dog back in, checked all the locks, and decided to stay home after all. She said we could continue our sleepover, but she'd be in her room if we needed anything. Before she left us, she said something that still gives me chills. "The houses here hold onto things. Just stay inside tonight, okay?" After she went to her room, the four of us tried to go back to normal, watching TV, playing games, but we were all on edge. Around 1 in the morning, Melissa, who'd always claimed to be sensitive to supernatural stuff, said she felt something was still out there. Devin, who was into meditation and that kind of thing, suggested they go out on the patio and try to sense whatever it was. I thought it was a stupid idea, but they insisted. The full moon was out, making the yard surprisingly bright. I stayed inside with Jake, watching through the glass door as Melissa and Devon sat cross-legged on the patio. They'd been out there maybe 5 minutes when they both suddenly tensed up. I heard a weird scurrying sound from behind the fence, like something small running back and forth really fast. It reminded me of a rabbit, but more frantic. "Do you see that?" Melissa whispered to Devon, pointing toward the fence. Jake and I pressed our faces against the glass, trying to see what they were looking at. "It's like a dark spot," Devin said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Right there, by the fence post." I squinted, and then I saw it too, this patch of darkness that seemed deeper than the rest of the shadows. It was maybe the size of a basketball, right at the base of the fence. The weird thing was, there was nothing there that should be casting a shadow. The moonlight was hitting that area directly. As we all stared at it, the dark spot moved. Not like a shadow shifting with the light, It moved deliberately, sliding along the bottom of the fence toward where Melissa and Devin were sitting. They both scrambled to their feet and backed up toward the house. The dark spot stopped moving. "What the hell is that?" Jake whispered. None of us had an answer. The four of us stood frozen, watching this impossibly dark patch that seemed to absorb the moonlight around it. Devin, always the brave one, grabbed a small garden trowel from beside the patio and tossed it toward the dark spot. The moment the trowel hit the ground near it, the spot darted away, not like a shadow disappearing, but like an animal running. It moved along the fence, then up and over into the alley. Without thinking, Melissa and Devin ran to the fence and looked over. Jake and I rushed out to join them. What we saw in that alley still haunts my dreams. The dark spot was bigger now, maybe the size of a person standing in the middle of the alley, but standing isn't quite right. It was like a hole in reality. It was blacker than black, like it was absorbing all light around it. The full moon was bright enough to illuminate the entire alley, but this thing stood out as a perfect absence of light. And around its edges was this weird distortion like heat waves coming off hot pavement, but dark instead of transparent. "It's looking at us," Melissa whispered, and somehow I knew she was right. Though it had no face, no features at all, I could feel it observing us. Suddenly, every dog in the neighborhood started barking, not just a few, but all of them, all at once, like they'd received some signal. The dark spot moved then, darting down the alley with impossible speed, zigzagging like no human or animal could. It moved too fast, too fluid, covering the length of the alley in seconds before disappearing around the corner. We stood there in shock for what felt like forever. The dogs continued barking for several minutes before gradually quieting down. None of us knew what to say. We went back inside, locked the door, and huddled together in the living room with all the lights on until morning. We didn't sleep. Every little noise made us jump. Around 5 in the morning, we heard scratching at the back door again, but none of us had the courage to look. When dawn finally came, we ventured outside again. There was nothing unusual in the yard or the alley, no girl, no dark spot, nothing to explain what we'd seen. But as we walked around the base housing area that morning, trying to shake off the night's events, we kept hearing whispers that seemed to follow us. Not words exactly, just sounds that would come from empty spaces between houses or from behind fences where nothing was visible. Jake's family moved off base about 2 months later. His dad requested a transfer, though he never said why. Jake told me his mom had started seeing the girl with the cut-up face standing at the foot of her bed at night. I've tried researching what we saw, that dark spot that moved with intelligence and purpose. I've never found anything that quite matches it. It wasn't a shadow person or anything I've read about in paranormal literature. It was something else entirely, something that could make itself visible in full moonlight with nothing to cast a shadow, something that moved with intelligence, something that every animal in the vicinity recognized as wrong. To this day, I can't walk down poorly lit alleys or stand in my backyard under a full moon. I'm always afraid I'll see that patch of absolute darkness moving toward me, that void that shouldn't exist in our reality. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, moving through that old Air Force base at night, following people home. Story 12. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but I can't stop thinking about it, and I need to tell someone who might understand or have experienced something similar. My husband Daniel and I bought our house in Blackwood Heights about 2 years ago. It's this beautiful old place, built in 1909, with all those charming features you'd expect. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, a gorgeous wraparound porch. The previous owners had updated the kitchen and bathrooms, but otherwise maintained most of the original character. One of the selling points for us, weirdly enough, was that it's directly across from a funeral home. We figured it would be quiet neighbors, plus the street is always well maintained, even in winter. The real estate agent seemed surprised we weren't bothered by it, but honestly, we thought it was kind of cool. My mom thought we were crazy, but the price was right, and the neighborhood is great for raising our daughter. Speaking of which, Emily is 2 now, the sweetest little thing with these big brown eyes that look exactly like Daniel's. She's going through that phase where she repeats everything we say, which is both adorable and terrifying depending on what slips out of our mouths. When we first moved in, a couple of neighbors made comments about the house being active. I remember Mrs. Fletcher from next door asking if we'd experienced anything yet with this knowing look. We just laughed it off. I mean, it's an old house. Of course it creaks and makes weird noises. Over the past couple years, we've had some incidents, I guess you could call them. Nothing major. Sometimes I'd catch what looked like a shadow person in my peripheral vision. Daniel's noticed it too, but we'd always just rationalize it away. My sleep paralysis also got worse after moving in. I'd had episodes occasionally before, but in this house they became more frequent and intense. I'd wake up unable to move, feeling like something was watching me from the corner of the room. But again, nothing that made us seriously question our decision to live here until last month. It was a Wednesday night in January. I remember because Daniel had just gotten back from a 3-day business trip that afternoon, and we were both exhausted but wanted to spend some time together watching that new crime documentary everyone was talking about. It was brutally cold outside, -35 degrees Celsius, the kind of cold where your nose hairs freeze the second you step outside. We had all the windows tightly shut, the furnace working overtime. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch between us around 8:30, curled up with her favorite stuffed rabbit. By 11, we decided to call it a night. I remember picking up Emily, she barely stirred, and telling Daniel I'd take her upstairs while he locked up. I put Emily in her bed, tucked her in, and went to our bedroom. I could hear Daniel downstairs, moving around in the kitchen. He always fills up his water bottle before coming to bed. I changed into my pajamas, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed, scrolling through my phone while waiting for him. That's when it happened. From downstairs, specifically from our living room, came the most horrific sound I've ever heard in my life. It was a scream, but not any normal scream. This was, God, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It was this high-pitched, almost demonic wail that seemed to start as a growl and then rise into something that didn't sound human at all. It lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I froze, my entire body just locked up. For a split second, I thought it might be Emily having a night terror, but I could see her baby monitor on my nightstand showing her still peacefully asleep in her bed. Besides, this didn't sound like anything a human throat could produce, especially not a toddler's. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone to text Daniel. "Did you hear that?" At the exact same moment, a text from him appeared on my screen. "Did you just scream?" My blood ran cold. We were both hearing it, which meant I wasn't imagining things. But if I was upstairs and Daniel was in the kitchen and Emily was asleep, what the hell made that sound in our living room? I heard Daniel running up the stairs 2 at a time. He burst into our bedroom, face pale. "What the fuck was that?" he whispered, his eyes wide. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely audible, but it came from downstairs, from the living room. Daniel immediately went to check on Emily, even though we could see she was still sleeping on the monitor. I think he needed to physically confirm she was okay. He came back seconds later, nodding that she was fine. We stood there in our bedroom, listening intently for any other sounds. The house was completely silent, except for the low hum of the furnace. Maybe it came from outside, Daniel suggested, but we both knew that wasn't possible. All our windows were closed tight against the freezing cold, and the sound had been crystal clear. It was inside our house, in our living room. "Should we go check?" I asked, not really wanting to. Daniel grabbed the baseball bat we keep in our closet. I followed him downstairs, staying a few steps behind. We checked the living room first. Nothing out of place. The TV was off. The couch where Emily had been sleeping still had the impression of her little body. Daniel methodically checked every corner of the downstairs, the kitchen, dining room, front hall, even the half bath under the stairs. All empty, all normal. He unlocked the front door and stepped onto the porch briefly, then came back in, shaking his head. It's dead quiet out there, so cold you can hear the trees creaking, but that's it. We went back upstairs, neither of us wanting to remain downstairs any longer. I checked on Emily again, still peacefully asleep, completely undisturbed. We got into bed, both of us wide awake, straining to hear any unusual sounds. Could it have been an animal? I whispered after a while. What kind of animal makes a sound like that? Daniel replied. Besides, we're in the middle of the city. There aren't foxes or coyotes around here. We spent the next hour theorizing. Could it have been a mechanical sound that just sounded like a scream? The furnace making a weird noise, a pipe freezing and bursting? But we couldn't find any explanation that fit what we'd heard. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that scream again. Daniel dozed off around 4 in the morning, but I could tell his sleep was restless. I kept thinking about Mrs. Fletcher's comments when we moved in and all those little incidents we'd brushed off over the past 2 years. Morning eventually came, and in the light of day, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Daniel suggested maybe it was a weird auditory hallucination we both experienced because we were tired. I wanted to believe that, but it felt like grasping at straws. Emily woke up her usual cheerful self, completely oblivious to what had happened. As I made her breakfast, I kept replaying that sound in my head. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't mechanical. What does that leave? I'm not particularly spiritual, but that afternoon, while Daniel took Emily to the park, I decided to smudge the house. My friend Leah had given me a sage bundle months ago, just in case, and I'd tucked it away in a drawer. I felt a bit silly doing it, but I went through every room, windows cracked despite the cold, letting the smoke fill each space, while I silently asked any negative energy to leave our home. It's been 4 weeks since then. We haven't heard the scream again, but things have changed. The house feels different somehow, heavier. I've been having sleep paralysis almost nightly now, and twice I've woken up to find Emily standing beside our bed in the middle of the night, staring silently at the wall above our heads. Daniel doesn't want to talk about it anymore. He's firmly decided it must have been some bizarre coincidence, maybe a car accident we didn't hear properly, or some weird acoustical phenomenon. But I know what I heard, and it was in our house. The other day, I ran into Mrs. Fletcher while getting the mail. I almost asked her about her comment when we first moved in, but something stopped me. Maybe I'm afraid of what she might tell me, or maybe I'm afraid she'll confirm what I already suspect, that there's something in our house that doesn't want us here. I don't know what to do. We can't afford to move right now, and besides, how do you explain to potential buyers why you're selling? Oh, by the way, something inhuman screams in the living room sometimes. Last night I woke up around 3 in the morning with that feeling of being watched. I opened my eyes and saw nothing, but I could have sworn I heard breathing that wasn't Daniel's or mine. I laid there, completely still, until I couldn't stand it anymore and turned on the lamp. Nothing was there, but as I reached to turn the light back off, I noticed something on our bedroom wall that made my stomach drop. Right above our headboard, where Emily keeps staring during her nighttime visits, was a small handprint. Too big to be Emily's, too small to be an adult's. I haven't told Daniel about it yet. I don't know if I will. Part of me wants to just paint over it and pretend I never saw it. But I know what I heard that night, and I know what I saw on our wall. Something is in our house, and I don't think the sage drove it away. I think it just made it angry. I keep thinking about the funeral home across the street and wondering if there's a connection. Is something coming over from there, or has it been in this house all along, and we just finally disturbed it somehow? I don't know why I'm even writing this. Maybe I just needed to tell someone who wouldn't immediately tell me I'm crazy or need sleep. Maybe someone reading this has experienced something similar and can tell me what to do. Because right now, I'm scared to be in my own home, but I have nowhere else to go. That scream, I still hear it in my dreams, and sometimes when I'm alone downstairs, I swear I can feel something watching me from the corner of the living room, just waiting to make that sound again. Story 13. I've never been one to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. I'm a pretty grounded guy. I work in IT. I'm all about logical explanations. But what happened last winter in Rockport has been eating away at me for months. I still can't make sense of it, and I figured maybe writing it down might help, or someone here might have experienced something similar. I live in Rockport, Maine. Small coastal town, quiet and peaceful, especially in winter. I've got a 4-year-old golden retriever named Cooper who needs his exercise, so we've got a routine. Every morning, even in winter, I'm up at 5 and out the door by 5:30 for our morning walk. It's early, yeah, but it works with my schedule, and honestly, I love the quiet of the pre-dawn hours. Just me, Cooper, and the occasional other early bird. This particular morning was mid-January, freezing cold but clear. Must have been around 15 degrees, maybe colder with the wind chill. One of those mornings where your breath hangs in the air and your nostrils stick together a little when you breathe in. I was bundled up, heavy coat, gloves, hat pulled down over my ears, boots with good grip because of the ice. Cooper doesn't mind the cold. He's built for it with that thick coat of his. We followed our usual route down Harbour View Road, past the shuttered summer shops, then up Maple Street toward the old cemetery. The streetlights cast these yellow pools of light every 50 feet or so, but between them it was pretty dark. The sky was just starting to lighten at the edges, that deep blue before any actual sunlight breaks through. Cooper was doing his usual thing, sniffing every fence post, checking his P-mail as I call it. We were approaching the intersection where Maple splits into Oak Street and Pine Lane. I always take Oak because it loops back toward home in a nice circle. There's a slight incline there, maybe a 20-degree angle, not steep but noticeable. I remember checking my watch. It was 5:47. I always keep track of time because I need to be back, showered, and at my desk by 8. As I looked up from my watch, I noticed someone walking toward us from the Oak Street fork. A woman, I thought, based on the silhouette. She had this wavy, shoulder-length hair that kind of bounced as she walked. She was wearing what looked like a longer coat or jacket that went past her hips. Nothing unusual about seeing another person out walking, even at that hour. There are a few other early risers in town. Joggers, shift workers heading home, insomniacs. Cooper noticed her too but didn't react much, just put his nose down to investigate something on the ground. I automatically started to shorten his leash a bit, the way you do when passing someone on a narrow sidewalk. I glanced down briefly to check for ice patches. There had been a freeze-thaw cycle the day before, and black ice was a real concern. The last thing I needed was to slip and face plant in front of a stranger. It couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 seconds that I looked down. When I looked up again, something was wrong. The figure was still there, but completely different. It was now much smaller, like maybe 2/3 the size it had been seconds before, and it wasn't coming toward us anymore. It was facing away, further up Oak Street. But here's the thing that made my stomach drop. While I could clearly see the legs moving in a walking motion, the figure wasn't actually going anywhere, just walking in place, but with purpose, like someone in a treadmill, except there was no treadmill. I stopped dead in my tracks. Cooper stopped too and looked up at the figure, then at me like, "You seeing this too, right?" The hairs on my arms were standing up inside my coat, but not from the cold. I blinked hard, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dim light. When I focused again, the figure was just gone, vanished. The street was completely empty. My first rational thought was that they must have turned off onto a side path or driveway, but there was nowhere to go right there, just an unbroken line of fences on both sides of the street. and they definitely hadn't continued up the street because I had a clear view for at least 100 yards up Oak, illuminated by those spaced-out streetlights. There was no way someone could have covered that distance in the seconds I'd been standing there. I stood frozen for maybe 30 seconds, scanning the street, looking for any movement. Nothing. Cooper wasn't barking or growling. He just seemed confused, ears perked up, head tilted slightly to one side. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding weird and thin in the cold air. No response, just the distant sound of waves from the harbor and the occasional creak of trees in the winter wind. I'm not ashamed to admit I was thoroughly freaked out. Not scared exactly, it didn't feel threatening, but deeply unsettled, like when you're absolutely certain you put your keys in your pocket, but they're not there when you reach for them. I decided to take Pine Lane instead of Oak Street that morning. No way was I walking up that hill. Cooper seemed fine with the change, though he kept looking back over his shoulder toward Oak Street. The rest of our walk was uneventful, but I couldn't stop replaying what I'd seen. Was it a trick of the light, some weird reflection? Did I briefly doze off while walking? None of those explanations made sense. I was wide awake, alert, and what I saw wasn't some vague shadow. It was detailed enough that I could see the walking motion, the change in size and direction. When I got home, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, still trying to process it. I even searched online for any reports of strange sightings in Rockport, but found nothing recent. I thought about asking neighbors if they'd experienced anything similar, but honestly, I was worried they'd think I was losing it. What stayed with me most is how the figure seemed to glitch. That's the only word I can think of to describe it, like a character in a video game when the graphics mess up. One moment normal, the next completely different, then gone. And that walking in place motion, perfectly normal movement, but without actually moving forward. It was so unnatural, yet somehow precise. I've walked that same route hundreds of times since moving to Rockport 4 years ago. Nothing like this ever happened before, and nothing like it has happened since. I still walk Cooper every morning, but I've changed our route permanently. We don't go near that intersection anymore, and I find myself avoiding it even when driving. The logical part of my brain has tried to dismiss it as a momentary hallucination or some trick of the pre-dawn light. But Cooper saw it too. I'm certain of that. Dogs don't hallucinate the same things their owners do. Sometimes I wonder if I glimpsed something crossing over from somewhere else. Like for a brief moment, the boundary between realities thinned out, and I saw through. I know that sounds crazy coming from a guy who troubleshoots network problems for a living. I'm supposed to believe in concrete, explainable things. But what I saw that morning defies explanation. I haven't told many people about this, just my brother when he visited last month, and now all of you. He suggested it might have been someone playing a prank, maybe with a drone or projection. But at 5:47 on a freezing January morning in a residential neighborhood seems far-fetched. The weirdest part is that I don't feel afraid when I think about it anymore. Just this profound sense of uncertainty. Like finding out the rules of physics occasionally take a coffee break. It's shaken my confidence in what's real and what's possible. Has anyone else experienced something like this? A person or object that seemed to glitch or malfunction like a piece of faulty software? Or am I the only one who's glimpsed whatever this was? I still walk Cooper every day, still get up at 5, still live my normal life. But I find myself looking more carefully at people I pass on the street. Sometimes I stop and watch them walk away, just to make sure they're moving the way they should. And sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I wonder if that figure is still out there somewhere, walking in place on Oak Street, stuck in some kind of loop between wherever it came from and wherever it was trying to go. I check online forums about local paranormal activity sometimes, hoping to find someone else who's seen something similar. So far, nothing. Part of me hopes it stays that way, that it was just a one-time glitch in reality. But another part of me wants confirmation that I'm not crazy, that what Cooper and I saw that morning was real, whatever real means anymore. Story 14. Mines, I never believed in guardian angels or spirits or any of that supernatural stuff until last month. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened, and I'm hoping writing this down might help me process it. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. I moved to the east side of the city about 6 months ago after graduating college. It's not the neighborhood I wanted to live in, but it's what I could afford on my entry-level salary. My parents begged me not to move here. They'd seen the crime statistics, heard about the break-ins, the assaults, even a couple of unsolved murders from the past year. But I was stubborn. I'd spent 4 years in a cramped dorm room and I wanted my own space. Besides, rent in the safer areas was double what I'm paying now. It's just temporary, I kept telling myself. 6 months to a year, tops. Just enough time to build some savings and find somewhere better. My apartment is a small one-bedroom unit in a run-down complex. The paint is peeling, the pipes make weird noises at night, and my neighbors keep to themselves. Most nights I come home from work, lock my deadbolt and chain lock, and try not to think about the police sirens that seem to be a constant soundtrack around here. What happened started on a Thursday 3 weeks ago. I remember it was Thursday because I'd just gotten my laundry done at the laundromat down the street. My building's machines are always broken. I was struggling with my overstuffed laundry bag, fumbling with my keys at my door when I felt a presence. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? It was that, but not threatening. I turned around and there it was, this beautiful white German shepherd, just sitting there, maybe 10 feet away from me, watching me with these intense eyes. No collar, no leash, just sitting there like it was waiting for me. Now, I'm not usually comfortable around big dogs. I was bitten by a neighbor's dog when I was 8, and I've been wary ever since. But this dog was different. It didn't bark or growl, it just looked at me. There was this intelligence in its eyes that I can't explain properly. It was like it was studying me, evaluating me somehow. "Hey there," I said quietly, not wanting to startle it. "You lost." The dog didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just continued staring at me. Normally, I would have hurried inside and closed the door, but something made me put down my laundry bag. I slowly extended my hand, palm down, the way you're supposed to approach unfamiliar dogs. The German shepherd watched my hand approach, then slowly stood up and walked toward me. No aggression, no excitement, just calm, deliberate movement. When it reached me, it sniffed my hand once, then pressed its head against my palm. I remember feeling how soft its fur was and how warm. I scratched behind its ears, and it gave a single slow wag of its tail. Just one wag, like a polite acknowledgement. I checked for a collar or any identification, but found nothing. The dog wasn't dirty or thin. It looked healthy and well cared for, which made me think it must belong to someone nearby. "Are you hungry? Thirsty?" I asked, feeling a bit silly talking to it. The dog just tilted its head slightly. I don't know what possessed me, but I opened my door and said, "Want to come inside for a bit, until we figure out where you belong?" To my surprise, the dog walked calmly into my apartment like it had been there before. No sniffing around frantically or marking territory. It just walked in and sat down in the middle of my living room watching me. I filled a bowl with water and checked my fridge for something a dog might eat. All I had was some hot dogs from a package I'd opened the day before. I heated one up quickly and offered it to the dog. This is where things got strange. The dog looked at the hot dog, then back at me. It didn't seem particularly interested in the food, which is weird because what dog turns down food? But after a moment, it very gently took the hot dog from my hand, so gently I barely felt its teeth, and placed it on the floor. It didn't eat it, just left it there. I remember thinking that was odd, but figured maybe it wasn't hungry or didn't like hot dogs. I was about to check if I had anything else when the dog suddenly stood up and walked to my front door. It looked back at me once, and I swear it was like it was trying to tell me something with that look. "You want to go back out?" I asked. The dog just stared at the door, so I opened it. Without any hesitation, it walked out, down the steps of my building, and disappeared around the corner. The whole encounter probably lasted less than 15 minutes, but it left me feeling, I don't know, like something significant had just happened. I went about my evening as usual. made a sad microwave dinner, watched some Netflix, and went to bed around 11. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper usually, but something woke me up around 2 in the morning. At first, I thought it was just another police siren, but then I realized it was coming from right outside my window. It was a rustling sound, like someone moving through the bushes beneath my bedroom window. My apartment is on the first floor, another safety concern my parents had pointed out, and my bedroom window faces the back of the building where there's just a small strip of grass and some scraggly bushes before the parking lot of the neighboring building. I froze in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The rustling continued, more deliberate now, and I heard what sounded like metal scraping against the window frame. Someone was trying to get in. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My phone was charging across the room, and I knew if I got up, whoever was out there would see me through the window. So I just lay there, paralyzed, listening to someone trying to break into my apartment. Then I heard it, a low, deep growl that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't coming from inside my apartment, but from outside, right where the rustling had been. The growl built into a snarl and then erupted into the most ferocious barking I've ever heard in my life. A man's voice shouted, "What the fuck?" followed by sounds of a struggle. I heard the bushes being violently shaken, more barking, a yelp of pain, and then cursing. It sounded like someone was being attacked, like the dog was attacking whoever had been at my window. The commotion lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. There was more shouting, sounds of running, and then silence. Complete silence, except for my own ragged breathing. I stayed frozen in bed for what must have been another 20 minutes, terrified that the person might come back. Finally, I worked up the courage to grab my phone and call 911. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. I met them at the front door, shaking so hard I could barely stand. 2 officers went around to check the back of the building while one stayed with me. When the others came back, their expressions were grim. "Ma'am, do you own a dog?" one of them asked. "No," I said. "Why?" "There's blood and what looks like white dog fur scattered in the bushes under your window," he explained, "and your window screen has been cut. Looks like someone was trying to break in but got interrupted." They asked if I'd seen any white dogs in the area, and that's when I told them about the German Shepherd from earlier that day. They exchanged looks when I described how it had appeared, come inside briefly, then left. "There's a blood trail leading away from your window," the officer said. "Whoever was trying to break in is probably injured. We'll increase patrols in the area tonight, but you might want to stay somewhere else if you can." I couldn't leave. I had nowhere else to go. After the police left, I dragged my dresser in front of the bedroom window and sat on my couch with all the lights on until morning. I didn't sleep at all. When daylight finally came, I worked up the courage to check outside. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was dried blood on my front porch, not just a few drops, but smears of it, like something bloody had been dragging itself across it, and mixed in with the blood were tufts of white fur. I followed the trail with my eyes. It led from the bushes under my bedroom window, around the side of the building, across my front porch, and then nothing. The trail just stopped at the bottom of the steps, like whatever was bleeding had simply vanished. The police came back that morning to take more photos and collect evidence. They told me they'd found a knife in the bushes, a hunting knife with a serrated edge, the kind you don't carry unless you're planning to hurt someone. They also found a ski mask. 2 days later, they arrested a man at the local hospital who'd come in with severe dog bites on his arms and face. Turns out he was wanted for 3 break-ins in the area, all targeting single women living alone. In 2 of those cases, the women had been assaulted. I should feel relieved that they caught him, but I can't stop thinking about that dog. No one in the neighborhood owns a white German Shepherd. No one reported one missing. The animal control officer who came to check said they hadn't picked up any dogs matching that description recently. I've been putting out food on my porch every night since then, but it remains untouched each morning. I've walked around the neighborhood looking for that dog, but it's like it never existed. Except I know it did. It saved my life. It somehow knew I was in danger and came back to protect me. Sometimes I think about those eyes, that one slow tail wag, and how it seemed completely uninterested in the food I offered, like it didn't need food, like it wasn't really a dog. I don't know if I believe in guardian angels or spirits, but I do know that whatever that white German shepherd was, it was sent to protect me. And now I always stop to pet every dog I see, just in case one of them is something more than just a dog, just in case one of them is watching over someone else who needs protection. I'm moving next week to a safer neighborhood with better security, but I'll never forget what happened. I'll never forget those intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through me. And sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear the soft padding of paws outside my door, keeping watch. Story 15. I never really believed in supernatural stuff. I was just a normal 16-year-old girl living in Pinecrest with my mom and stepdad. My life was pretty ordinary until that painting came into our house. It started about 3 months ago when my stepdad, Mike, brought home this colorful hand-painted canvas of Marilyn Monroe. He works as a mover, and apparently one of his clients was getting rid of it and told him he could take it if he wanted. When he showed it to me and my mom after work, I thought it was really cool. It wasn't like those typical black and white Marilyn photos everyone has seen. This was vibrant with pinks and blues and yellows. The artist had given her this mysterious smile that seemed to follow you around the room. "Rachel, I thought you might like this for your room," Mike said. The lady was just going to throw it away. I was excited. It was way better than the band posters I had on my walls, but I noticed my mom's face kind of freeze when she saw it. She just stared at it for a long time without saying anything. "I don't think that's a good idea," she finally said. She wouldn't look directly at the painting anymore. "Why not?" I asked. "It's just Marilyn Monroe. It's not like it's inappropriate or anything." "I just don't like it," she said, but wouldn't give any real reason. After some back and forth, she reluctantly gave in. I think she felt bad since I'd already seen it and clearly wanted it. So that evening, Mike helped me hang it on the wall right above my bed. For context, our house is this old ranch-style place with a weird layout. My bedroom is at one end, and directly underneath runs this unfinished basement that extends the length of the house. The basement walls are this bright orange painted brick with concrete floors. Previous owners had some questionable taste. It's always been creepy down there, but I never really thought much about it until what happened next. That first night with the painting, I went to bed feeling pretty normal. I remember looking up at Marilyn's face as I was drifting off, thinking how cool it was to have actual artwork in my room. Then the nightmare hit. I was in my bed, but something felt wrong. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt like someone was sitting on my chest, pressing down harder and harder. The room seemed darker than usual, with just enough moonlight coming through the window to see the outlines of my furniture. I tried to scream but couldn't get any air. The painting above me looked different somehow. Marilyn's eyes seemed to be looking directly at me, and her smile had changed from mysterious to mocking. I woke up gasping for breath, my t-shirt soaked with sweat. I had to turn on my bedside lamp just to convince myself no one was in the room with me. The painting looked normal again, just a colorful portrait of Marilyn Monroe. I told myself it was just a random nightmare and managed to fall back asleep eventually. The second nightmare that same night was even worse. I dreamed my bed was sinking, like the floor beneath it had turned to quicksand. I was clutching my sheets as the bed frame creaked and groaned, slowly descending through the floor. I could see the wooden boards splintering around me as my mattress sank lower and lower until I was falling straight into the pitch-black basement below. I landed with a thud on the concrete floor. In the dream, the basement was much darker than it is in real life. I couldn't see anything except a thin sliver of light coming from under the door at the top of the stairs. I scrambled to my feet and started feeling my way toward that light, desperate to get out. That's when I heard it, a scratching sound behind me, then something small moving quickly across the floor. I ran for the stairs, my hands frantically searching for the railing in the darkness. As I climbed, the scratching got louder, closer. I glanced back and saw something small and black in that thin strip of light from the door, just a glimpse of what looked like a small, hunched creature with two long limbs moving in jerky motions. I couldn't see its face, just its silhouette, and that was terrifying enough. I woke up screaming this time. My mom rushed into my room, looking panicked. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" she asked, sitting on my bed and putting her arms around me. I was shaking so badly I could hardly speak. "Just a nightmare," I managed to say. I didn't want to seem like a little kid scared of the dark. She glanced up at the painting, then quickly looked away. "Try to get some sleep, honey. You've got school tomorrow." After she left, I lay awake for a long time, staring at Marilyn's face in the dim light. It was just a painting, I told myself, just a stupid painting. The next night, I had 3 more nightmares, each one leaving me gasping for air when I woke up. In one, I was trapped in my room while something pounded on my door, trying to get in. In another, I heard whispering coming from the basement, voices too quiet to make out the words but somehow threatening. I'd never had nightmares like this before. They felt so real, so physical. I'd wake up with my heart pounding so hard it hurt. By the 3rd day, I was exhausted from lack of sleep and jumping at every little noise in the house. I started to wonder if the painting had something to do with it. It seemed ridiculous. How could a painting cause nightmares? But the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. The nightmares had started the exact night we hung it up. I found myself avoiding looking directly at it. When I was doing homework at my desk, I'd position myself so my back wasn't to the painting. At night, I'd turn my bedside lamp so the light didn't hit Marilyn's face. I know it sounds crazy, but I started to feel like she was watching me, like her expression changed slightly when I wasn't looking. Finally, after the 3rd night of horrible dreams, I broke down and told my mom. "I think it might be the painting," I said over breakfast, trying to sound casual. "I've been having these really bad nightmares ever since we put it up." She put down her coffee mug a little too quickly, spilling some on the table. "What kind of nightmares?" I told her about the suffocating feeling, about my bed sinking into the basement, about being chased by something I couldn't quite see. My mom was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Let's try something. We'll move the painting to our bedroom and see if that helps." That afternoon, Mike took the painting down and hung it in their room instead. I felt instant relief when it was gone, like I could finally breathe properly in my own room again. For the next few nights, I slept peacefully. No nightmares, no waking up gasping for air. I started to feel silly for blaming a painting for my bad dreams. Maybe it was just stress from school or something. Then one morning, I came down for breakfast and found my mom sitting at the kitchen table, staring into her coffee. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were red-rimmed with dark circles underneath. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked. She looked up at me, and I could tell something was seriously wrong. "I had dreams last night," she said quietly. "Horrible dreams." My stomach dropped. "What about?" She shuddered. "One was about kittens, sick kittens with crusted eyes lying in a box. They were barely moving, and there were flies everywhere. So many flies." She wrapped her hands tighter around her mug. I've never felt such dread before. It was wrong. Everything about it felt wrong. Over the next 2 days, my mom had more nightmares. She wouldn't tell me all the details, just that they were getting worse. On the 3rd day, I came home from school to find her taking the painting down from their bedroom wall. "That's it," she said when she saw me standing in the doorway. "I don't care if I sound crazy. This thing is not staying in our house." "What are you going to do with it?" I asked. "Get rid of it, far away from here." She wrapped the painting in an old sheet and carried it out to her car. I followed her to the garage, feeling both relieved and weirdly guilty, like we were overreacting to a perfectly innocent object. "Mom, are you sure it's the painting? Maybe it's just coincidence." She turned to look at me, her hand on the car trunk. "Rachel, I've never believed in this kind of thing before, but I know what I felt in those dreams. There's something wrong with that painting, something attached to it." She put the wrapped canvas in her trunk and slammed it shut. "I'll drop it off at Goodwill on my way to work tomorrow." But the next day, when I got home from school, the painting was still in her trunk. She said she couldn't bring herself to donate it. The thought of another family hanging it in their house made her feel sick. She decided to throw it away instead, but for some reason she didn't want to put it in our own trash. I put it in my trunk this morning, planning to throw it in a dumpster somewhere, she told me that evening. But all day at work, I kept feeling like it was watching me, even from inside the trunk, parked outside. I know that sounds insane. The painting stayed in her trunk for 2 more days. Mom kept saying she was going to get rid of it, but something always stopped her. Finally, she came home one evening looking relieved. "It's gone," she said. I drove to the other side of town and left it at the end of someone's driveway on garbage day. I couldn't just throw it in a dumpster. It felt too personal somehow. But leaving it for garbage collection, I don't know. It seemed right. After that, things went back to normal. The nightmares stopped completely for both of us. We never talked about it much again. I think we both felt a little embarrassed about how seriously we'd taken it. But to this day, I still think about that painting. What was it about that particular image of Marilyn Monroe that caused such visceral terror? Was it something in the paint itself, or something more inexplicable? I've never experienced anything like those nightmares before or since. Sometimes I wonder what happened to the painting. Did the garbage collectors take it away, or did someone else find it, think it was too nice to throw away and take it home? I hope not. I really hope not. Story 16. I've been debating whether to share this for years. I'm 32 now, but this happened when I was 5, almost 6 years old. I've told maybe 3 people in my entire life, and each time I could see that look in their eyes, that this person is either lying or crazy look, but I know what I saw. I remember it as clearly as what I had for breakfast this morning. It was summer, mid-July, one of those lazy, too hot afternoons where the air conditioning was working overtime and the windows were all shut tight. Mom was taking a nap in her bedroom upstairs. Dad was at work. He always worked late in those days. My older brother was at soccer practice, so it was just me in the living room watching cartoons with the volume turned low so I wouldn't wake Mom. Our living room was pretty big, open concept, I guess people call it now. It connected to the dining area and had these sliding glass doors that led to the backyard. The couch faced away from those doors, toward the TV, so I couldn't see what was behind me without turning around. I remember I was watching something stupid, probably SpongeBob or something, when I got this weird feeling. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? That prickly sensation on the back of your neck? It was like that, but 10 times stronger, like every cell in my body was suddenly screaming, "Danger!" I muted the TV. The house was completely silent except for the hum of the AC, and then I heard it, this weird clicking sound, like someone tapping their fingernails on glass, but different, more organic. It was coming from behind me. I turned around, and there it was, a praying mantis, but not a normal one. This thing was huge. I mean impossibly, unnaturally huge. It stood, I'm not exaggerating, at least 8 feet tall. Its body was that familiar mantis green, but slightly translucent, like you could almost see through parts of it. Its front legs were folded in that prayer position that gives them their name, and its triangular head was tilted, looking directly at me. The thing that still haunts me was its eyes. They were these massive, bulging black orbs that seemed to absorb light, and they were fixed on me, studying me. I didn't scream. I didn't run. Some primal instinct kept me frozen in place. I knew that moving would be bad. I just sat there, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I remember thinking very clearly, don't look it in the eyes. So I stared at its chest instead. The mantis was just standing there, not moving except for those weird antennas on top of its head, which swayed slightly like they were feeling the air. It filled the entire space between our dining area and living room. Its legs, all 6 of them, were bent at odd angles to fit in the space. Time felt weird. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Me frozen on the couch, it standing there watching me. Maybe 2 minutes, 5. It felt like hours. Then it moved. Not toward me, thank God. It shifted its weight and made that clicking sound again. I realized it was coming from its mouthparts. Those weird mandibles they have. They were opening and closing slightly. That was when I broke. The fear finally unlocked my muscles, and I bolted. I didn't look back. I ran straight upstairs to my mom's room and burst through the door. Mom, there's a giant bug downstairs." I was crying by this point, shaking uncontrollably. She groaned and rolled over. "Honey, it's just a bug, probably a spider." "No, it's a praying mantis. It's huge." I was tugging at her arm now, desperate. Mom sighed and sat up, rubbing her eyes. All right, I'll come look. But then you need to let me finish my nap, okay?" She followed me downstairs. I stayed behind her the whole way, peering around her legs as we entered the living room. I was pointing toward where it had been. There, right there. But it was gone. The space was empty. The sliding glass door was still closed and locked. There was no sign that anything had been there at all. Mom looked at me with that tired parent look. "See? No bugs. Maybe you were dreaming, or it was just shadows from the TV." "But Mom, it was right there. It was bigger than you. It was looking at me." She knelt down and felt my forehead. "You don't have a fever. Maybe you dozed off watching TV, had a little nightmare." I knew I hadn't been asleep. I knew what I'd seen, but even at that age, I could tell this was one of those times when adults weren't going to believe a kid. So I just nodded and let her think I'd had a bad dream. Mom went back upstairs to finish her nap, and I sat in the kitchen instead of going back to the living room. I stayed there until my brother got home, and I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't tell anyone for years. The weird thing is, as terrified as I was, I never felt like the mantis wanted to hurt me. It was scary because it was impossible. Things that big don't exist, and I knew that even as a little kid. But it never made any threatening moves. It just observed me. I had nightmares about it for months afterward, always the same dream. The mantis standing there watching me with those black eyes. Sometimes in the dreams it would speak, but I could never remember what it said when I woke up. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been my imagination, that I'd fallen asleep on the couch and had a vivid nightmare. That's what everyone would say if I told them, so I made myself believe it too. I packed the memory away and moved on with my life. Until college. I was 20 years old, sitting in my friend Eve's apartment during a party. A few people were in the other room using mushrooms. Not my thing, but I was the designated sober person that night. Eve had taken a small dose and was sitting with me in the kitchen talking about random stuff. Suddenly, one of our friends, Josh, started freaking out in the living room. Bad trip. He was curled up in a ball, hyperventilating, saying he could see terrible things. Eve got really calm and focused. She went over to him, knelt down, and started talking to him in this soothing voice. She knew exactly what to say, exactly how to guide him through it. Within 10 minutes, he was calm again, even smiling. Later, when it was just us cleaning up, I asked her how she knew what to do. "The mantis people told me," she said casually, like she was telling me what she had for lunch. I froze. "The what?" "The mantis beings." She was wiping down the counter, not even looking at me. "Last time I did mushrooms, I met these tall, praying mantis-like entities. They were like teachers, guides. They showed me how to help someone through a bad psychedelic experience. They were super wise." My hands were shaking. "What did they look like?" She thought for a moment. "Tall, really tall, green, but kind of see-through. They had these huge black eyes." She trailed off, noticing my expression. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told her everything, about that summer day when I was 5, about the mantis in our living room, about how I'd convinced myself it was a dream because the alternative was too crazy to consider. Eve listened without interrupting. When I finished, she just nodded. "You're not the only one, you know. There are tons of reports of mantis beings. Some people see them during meditation, others during sleep paralysis or psychedelic experiences. Some people even report them during," she lowered her voice, "alien abduction experiences." "But I wasn't on drugs, I wasn't meditating, I was just a kid watching TV." She shrugged. Maybe that's when they can reach us easiest, when we're kids, before we're fully conditioned to filter out the impossible. I spent the next several weeks in an internet rabbit hole, reading about other people's encounters with mantis beings. Some stories were clearly bullshit, but others had details so similar to my experience that it made my skin crawl. The height, the translucent green, the clicking sound, the sense of being observed rather than threatened. I still don't know what I saw that day. Was it a hallucination? Some weird neurological glitch in my developing brain? An actual interdimensional being? I honestly don't know. What I do know is that it was real to me. I saw it. I heard it. And sometimes when I'm alone in a quiet room, I still get that prickly feeling on the back of my neck, that sense that something is watching me, and I have to fight the urge to turn around, because part of me is terrified that if I do, it'll be there again, 8 feet tall, green, watching me with those enormous black eyes. The most unsettling part? Sometimes I think it's been watching me my whole life, just observing, waiting. For what? I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to find out. Story 17. I honestly don't know where to start with this. I've been sitting here for an hour trying to type this out, deleting and starting over because my hands are shaking just thinking about it all. I guess I should begin with moving back to Pinewood last year. Never thought I'd end up back in my childhood home. But after Mom passed, I inherited the place, and with my lease ending in the city, it just made financial sense. The house was exactly how I remembered it. The faded blue siding, the creaky porch steps, and that smell of old wood and dust that never quite goes away no matter how much you clean. Mom wasn't much of a housekeeper in her later years, so the place was cluttered with decades of accumulated stuff. I spent the first few days just sorting through boxes and trash bags, trying to create some semblance of order. It was on the third night that the weird stuff started. Nothing major at first, just little things that were easy to dismiss. I'd put my coffee mug on the kitchen counter and later find it on the dining table. I'd fold a blanket and place it on the armchair, only to find it neatly arranged on the couch an hour later. I blamed it on being tired from all the unpacking and cleaning. Then the pillows started moving. I'd wake up and find pillows from my bedroom scattered throughout the house, one in the bathtub, another on the kitchen floor. One morning, I came downstairs to find every single trash can in the house tipped over, garbage spilled everywhere. I was furious, thinking maybe raccoons had gotten in somehow, but there was no sign of forced entry, and some of the mess was in rooms with tightly closed windows. I have 2 cats, Milo and Bean, and at first I thought maybe they were going through some weird adjustment phase and acting out, but they seemed just as freaked out as I was. They'd stare at empty corners of rooms, backs arched, tails puffed up. Sometimes they'd bolt from a room for no apparent reason, like something had scared them. The doors were what really started to get to me. I'd leave a door open and turn around to find it closed. At first I thought maybe there were drafts in this old house, but then one night I watched the bathroom door slowly close by itself while I was brushing my teeth. There was no breeze, no logical explanation. I just stood there, toothbrush in my mouth, heart racing as the door gently clicked shut. That's when I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie in bed, ears straining for any unusual sound, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house settling. One night, I was drifting off to sleep when I felt something heavy sit on the foot of my bed. The mattress actually depressed, creating a visible dent in the covers. Both my cats were already curled up next to me, so it couldn't have been them. I froze, unable to move or speak, just watching that dent in my comforter, terrified of what I might see if I looked directly at it. After what felt like hours, the weight disappeared, and I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, back pressed against the headboard. The next day, exhausted from lack of sleep, I decided to take a nap in the afternoon. As I was drifting off, I heard a strange clicking noise like someone tapping their fingernails against wood. Then came the whisper, right next to my ear, "You don't remember me." I jerked awake, heart pounding. That voice, it was familiar in a way that made my blood run cold. And suddenly, a name popped into my head that I hadn't thought about in years. Jane. When I was a kid, around 6 or 7, I had what my parents called an imaginary friend named Jane. She would visit me in the backyard, always wearing the same pale blue dress with a white collar. I insisted she was real, but no one else could ever see her. Eventually, as I got older, Jane stopped visiting, and I forgot about her until that moment. "I know you can hear me, Rachel," the voice whispered again. "Don't you want to play together like we used to?" I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. "I've missed you," Jane continued, her voice sounding both childlike and ancient at the same time. "Why did you leave me for so long?" I managed to whisper back. "You weren't real. You were just my imagination." The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, making me shiver despite the summer heat outside. "I was always real," Jane said, sounding hurt and angry, "and now I want to play again." I got up and ran downstairs, turning on every light in the house. I called my friend Melissa and tried to explain what was happening, but even as I was speaking, I could hear how crazy it all sounded. She suggested it might be stress or maybe even carbon monoxide poisoning, and promised to come by the next day to check on me. That night, as I was trying to distract myself with TV on the couch, I heard heavy snoring coming from the spare bedroom upstairs, the kind of deep rumbling snore that could only come from an adult. I could hear movement too, like someone rolling over in bed, the springs creaking beneath their weight. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I crept upstairs and slowly pushed open the door to the spare room. The bed was still covered in boxes I hadn't unpacked yet, but in the dim light filtering in from the hallway, I could make out what looked like a form under the blankets, a large human-shaped lump that shouldn't have been there. I slammed the door shut and ran back downstairs, grabbing my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, the voice was back. "That's just Daddy," Jane giggled. "He's tired from the trip." I dropped my phone and backed against the wall. "This isn't happening," I whispered to myself. "This isn't real." "We're all real," Jane replied, and I swear I felt small, cold fingers brush against my arm. "And we're all here now." I spent the rest of the night on the couch, too terrified to go back upstairs. At some point I must have dozed off because I woke up to the feeling of someone sitting down beside me. The couch cushion dipped, and I could feel the pressure of a body next to mine, though there was nothing visible there. "My family's here now to live with you," Jane whispered, her voice coming from right beside me. "We've been waiting so long for you to come back." Before I could respond, I heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs, slow, deliberate steps that made the old wooden staircase creak and groan. I watched in horror as the recliner across from me slowly compressed, the leather audibly squeaking as if someone invisible had just sat down. "That's Mama," Jane said. "She likes that chair." Then came a sound that made my skin crawl. The distinct noise of wheels rolling across the hardwood floor in the hallway, approaching the living room. "And here comes my brother," Jane announced cheerfully. "He can't walk since the accident, but he still likes to get around." The wheelchair sound stopped at the entrance to the living room, and I swear I could feel eyes watching me, though there was nothing there to see. The next morning I called Melissa in hysterics. She came over right away and brought her husband, Tom, who apparently has some experience with paranormal investigation or whatever. He walked through the house with some kind of EMF meter that kept going crazy in certain spots, especially in the spare bedroom and near the recliner in the living room. While they were there, things escalated. A glass on the kitchen counter shattered without anyone touching it. Books flew off the shelves in the study. 3 plates broke in the sink, even though no one was near it. Tom said it was classic poltergeist activity, potentially triggered by my return to the house. I couldn't stay there another night. Melissa and Tom helped me pack some essentials, and I checked into a hotel in town. I was so exhausted I slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, I felt more clear-headed and almost convinced myself I had been overreacting. After 3 days at the hotel, I decided to go back to the house, just to check on things and maybe grab more clothes. What I found shocked me. The house was immaculate. All the boxes I'd been unpacking were gone, the floors were swept and mopped, and everything was organized and put away. It looked better than it had in decades. I called Melissa, who came over immediately. She was just as confused as I was. We checked the doors and windows, all locked from the inside. There was no sign of a break-in, just someone had cleaned my entire house. That night I decided to stay. Maybe it was foolish, but I was starting to wonder if there was some logical explanation for everything. Maybe a neighbor had a key I didn't know about. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown from the stress of losing my mom and moving back to my childhood home. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to a loud crash from down the hall. I followed the noise to my home office and found the room trashed. Papers everywhere, books on the floor, the desk chair overturned. But strangely, my work laptop sat untouched in the center of the desk, perfectly aligned with the edges. "I'm sorry." Jane's voice came from behind me. "Tommy gets angry sometimes. He didn't mean to make a mess." I whirled around but saw nothing. "What do you want from me?" I screamed into the empty hallway. "Why won't you leave me alone?" "Because this is our home too," she replied, her voice sad now. "We've been here all along. We're not trying to scare you, Rachel. We want to take care of you and the house." "You're ghosts?" I asked, feeling ridiculous even as the words left my mouth. "Yes," Jane said simply. "We died a long time ago, but we still remember you. We want you to remember us too." And suddenly, fragments of memories started coming back to me, not of an imaginary friend, but of the family that lived next door when I was little. There had been a girl my age named Jane, whom everyone called Jane because her first and middle names were both Jane, and she had parents and a brother in a wheelchair. I was about to ask more when I felt something change in the air. The temperature plummeted, and the light bulb in the hallway behind me shattered. Jane's voice became urgent, frightened. "He's coming," she whispered. "You need to hide." Before I could ask who he was, something slammed into the wall next to me with enough force to crack the plaster. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door, but whatever it was followed me. I could hear it breathing outside my door, heavy, ragged breaths that didn't sound human. I dove under my covers like a terrified child, shaking uncontrollably. The lock on my door clicked open, though no one had touched it. Heavy footsteps approached my bed, and then the covers were ripped away. I came face to face with something I still can't fully describe. A face, but wrong somehow. Red and distorted, with eyes that seemed to burn from within. It smelled like smoke and rotting meat. It leaned in close to my face and screamed, a sound so terrible and inhuman that I felt like my eardrums would burst. I must have passed out. When I woke up, it was morning, and Melissa was shaking me, having let herself in with the spare key I'd given her. I was on the floor of my bedroom, the sheets and blankets scattered around me, deep scratches in the hardwood that hadn't been there before. I moved out that day. Melissa and Tom helped me find an apartment in town, and they arranged for a local pastor and a medium to cleanse the house. For almost a year, things were quiet. I even started renovating the house, thinking maybe I could sell it eventually. But last week, it started again. A pillow from my apartment showed up on my mom's old recliner when I went to check on the house. And yesterday, as I was leaving, I heard Jane's voice one more time. "He's coming back, Rachel, and this time, he's coming for you." I'm sitting in my apartment right now, typing this with the lights on, jumping at every sound. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know what Jane and her family want from me, or what that thing was that attacked me. All I know is that I'm afraid to close my eyes, because every time I do, I see that red face and smell that awful smoke, and I can feel it getting closer. Story 18. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night thinking I hear guitar strings. It's been 8 months since it happened, but I can't shake the feeling that he's still here with me somehow. I know how this sounds, but I need to write it down. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not losing my mind. I grew up in Millbrook, one of those riverside towns where everyone knows everyone. My family has lived here for generations. My dad runs the local hardware store. My mom teaches at the elementary school. We're fixtures in the community, which means everyone always watches what I do. Being the eldest daughter in the Palmer family comes with expectations. That's why what happened with James was so different for me. I first noticed him last spring playing his guitar by the river bend, where kids from town hang out after school. He wasn't from Millbrook. His family had moved here from Cincinnati about a month earlier. He sat on this big flat rock, fingers moving effortlessly across the strings, completely lost in the music. I'd never seen anyone play like that before, with such passion. I tried not to stare, but something about him made it impossible to look away. My friend Emma nudged me and whispered, "That's James Miller. His dad got a job at the paper mill." I nodded, pretending I wasn't completely captivated. For weeks, I found excuses to walk by the river. Sometimes he'd be there, sometimes not. When he was, I'd sit with my friends nearby, stealing glances while pretending to read or chat. One day in early June, I was alone, waiting for Emma, who was running late. James looked up, caught me watching, and smiled. My face burned red, but instead of looking away, I smiled back. "You're Sarah Palmer, right?" he asked, setting his guitar down. I was shocked he knew my name. "Yeah," I managed to say. "I've seen you around. Do you like music?" That simple question started everything. We talked for hours that day. He told me about Cincinnati, about learning guitar from his grandfather, about wanting to study music in college. I told him about growing up in Millbrook, about my annoying younger brothers, about feeling trapped sometimes by everyone's expectations. All summer we met by the river. My parents would have had a fit if they knew I was spending so much time alone with a boy they hadn't approved of, so we kept it quiet. It wasn't just about their rules. There was something special about having this connection that belonged just to us. By August, I was completely in love with him. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, how he'd play a song he was working on and look to me for approval, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke about things that mattered to him. On a warm night in mid-August, he played a song he'd written for me. I can still hear the melody if I close my eyes. Something sweet and a little sad, like he knew our summer couldn't last forever. When he finished, he looked at me with those serious brown eyes. "Sarah, I want to do this right. I want to meet your parents, come to your house. I want to be with you properly." My heart nearly burst. I untied the navy blue ribbon I always wore in my hair. My grandmother had given it to me years ago, and wrapped it around his wrist. "Keep this," I said. "Promise you'll give it back to me when you meet my parents." He tied it securely, then kissed me for the first time. "I promise." 2 days later, on August 17th, a group of us went swimming at the river. It was scorching hot, one of those late summer days where the air feels like it's pressing down on you. Emma and her boyfriend Tyler were there, plus a few other friends from school, and James, of course, my navy ribbon still tied around his wrist. The river has two main swimming spots. The first is a gentle bend with a small beach area where the water stays shallow. That's where the girls usually stayed. About a quarter-mile downstream, there's a deeper section with tall rocks where the guys like to show off by diving. The current runs stronger there, but all the local boys grow up swimming in it. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. We splashed in the shallows, laid out on towels to dry off, ate the sandwiches and chips we'd brought. James kept glancing at me, that secret smile on his face that made my stomach flip. Around 3 in the afternoon, the guys started getting restless. "We're heading to the rocks," Tyler announced. "You girls want to come watch?" Emma and the others said no. They were comfortable where they were, but I wanted to see James swim. I'd told him once that I'd never been to the diving rocks because my parents thought they were too dangerous. "I'll come," I said, ignoring Emma's raised eyebrows. We walked along the riverside path. James held my hand when no one was looking, squeezing it gently. When we reached the rocks, I understood why my parents worried. The river narrowed there, flowing faster around large boulders. The diving rock itself stood about 20 feet above the water. "It's deeper than it looks," Tyler assured me, seeing my expression. "We've been jumping from here since we were kids." I sat on a lower rock, feet dangling in the cool water, watching as the guys took turns diving. James was hesitant at first, He hadn't grown up swimming here like the others, but after watching a few jumps, he seemed eager to try. "Be careful," I called as he climbed up. He grinned down at me, pointing to the ribbon on his wrist. "I've got my good luck charm." I remember everything about that moment with perfect clarity. The way the sunlight hit the water, creating diamonds on the surface. The beads of sweat on James's forehead. The navy ribbon, darker now from being wet, tied securely around his wrist. His smile, confident but with a hint of nervousness. He stood at the edge, looked down at me one more time, then jumped. It was a clean dive. His body cut through the water with barely a splash. I was smiling, proud of him, waiting for him to surface with that triumphant grin, but he didn't come up. At first, no one panicked. Guys often swam underwater after a dive, trying to surprise each other. 10 seconds passed. 20. Tyler frowned, scanning the water. "James," he called. 30 seconds. I stood up, heart beginning to race. "James." The next few minutes were chaos. Tyler and the other guys dove in, searching. I ran along the edge, scanning the water, screaming his name until my throat burned. Someone ran back to get the others. Emma arrived, put her arm around me, but I shook her off. I couldn't be comforted, not until we found him. An hour later, the sheriff's department was there with boats. They made us go home, but I refused to leave. I sat on the riverbank, hugging my knees, watching as they searched until darkness made it impossible to continue. They found his body 3 days later, washed up on a sandbar nearly 2 miles downstream. I wasn't there when they pulled him out, but my dad was. He came home with red eyes and sat me down at the kitchen table. "Sarah, honey, I need to tell you something about James." I already knew. I'd known since the moment he didn't surface. "They found the ribbon," Dad said gently. "It was still on his wrist. Sheriff Williams gave it to me to give to you." He placed the navy ribbon on the table between us. It was still damp, the color darker than before. I couldn't touch it. The funeral was held the following week. I sat in the back of the church, unable to face his parents. How could I tell them that their son had been trying to impress me, that if I hadn't gone to the rocks that day, maybe he wouldn't have jumped? After everyone left, I approached the closed casket and finally placed the ribbon on top. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." The days that followed were a blur. I barely ate, hardly slept. My parents were worried sick, but there was nothing they could do to ease my guilt and grief. 3 weeks after the funeral, I made a decision. I would learn to play guitar, to feel close to James somehow. My dad helped me pick out a used acoustic guitar from a shop in the next town over. I found beginner tutorials online and practiced until my fingers were raw. The physical pain was almost a relief from the emotional agony. That's when it started. It was a Tuesday night in late September. I'd finally fallen asleep after hours of staring at the ceiling. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of guitar strings, just a few notes, soft and distant. At first, I thought it was part of a dream. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next night I heard it again. 3 or 4 chords, played softly, as if someone was testing the instrument. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, and listened. The sound seemed to be coming from outside my window. I got up, heart pounding, and looked out. Our backyard was empty, bathed in moonlight. The sound had stopped. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, my grief playing tricks on me. But on the 3rd night, there was no denying it. I woke to the distinct melody of the song James had written for me. It wasn't just a few notes this time, but the entire introduction, played exactly as he had played it. I froze in my bed, the hair on my arms standing up. "James?" I whispered into the darkness. The music stopped abruptly. I ran to the window, throwing it open, but again saw nothing. This continued for weeks, not every night, but 2 or 3 times a week, always between 2 and 4 in the morning, always the same song, his song, played exactly as he had played it, with the same slight hesitation before the bridge, the same flourish at the end of the chorus. I tried to be logical. Maybe it was a recording. Maybe someone was playing a cruel joke. But the sound wasn't coming from a speaker. It had the resonance of a live acoustic guitar. And who would be so cruel? Who even knew about that song besides me? One night in early November, I decided to follow the music. When it started, I slipped out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and crept downstairs and out the back door. The melody was clearer outside, drifting from the direction of the river. I followed the path behind our house that led to the water. The music grew louder as I approached, my heart hammering in my chest. When I reached the river's edge, the song was so clear it was as if the guitarist was sitting right beside me. But there was no one there. The water flowed dark and silent under the moon. The song played on, filling the night air around me. And then I saw it, a ripple in the water moving against the current, heading toward me. As it approached the bank, I caught a glimpse of something navy blue just beneath the surface. I dropped my flashlight and stumbled backward, falling onto the damp ground. The music stopped instantly. When I gathered the courage to look again, the water was still, the ripple gone. I ran home and didn't leave my room for 2 days. My parents thought I was sick. Maybe I was. The music continued sporadically after that night. I never followed it to the river again, but sometimes when it plays, I swear I can smell river water in my room, feel a cold dampness in the air. Last week, I was practicing guitar in my room when my navy hair ribbon, the one I'd started wearing again after that night by the river, untied itself from my hair and fell to the floor. As I reached to pick it up, it moved just slightly, as if pulled by an invisible hand. I don't know what's happening. I don't know if James is trying to keep his promise to return the ribbon, or if grief has driven me completely insane. All I know is that I hear his music, and sometimes, in the space between sleeping and waking, I feel cold, wet fingers brush against my cheek. I haven't told anyone until now. How could I? But I needed to write it down, to put it somewhere outside my own head. The music started again last night. This time it didn't stop until dawn. Story 19. I've been debating whether to share this for years. It's not something I talk about often because most people just think I made it up, or that I was a kid with an overactive imagination, but I know what I saw, both times. And finding out the history of our house years later just confirmed what I'd already known deep down. I grew up in my grandparents' home, about 30 minutes outside the city. It was one of those big old houses with too many rooms and creaky floorboards that my grandparents had bought when my mom was a teenager. By the time I came along, 3 generations of us lived there. My grandparents, my mom, single parent, and me. The first incident happened when I was around 4 or 5. I remember it was a Saturday afternoon because my mom always took naps on Saturdays after lunch. She worked long hours during the week, so weekends were her chance to catch up on sleep. I'd been put down for a nap too, but I woke up before her. I remember the house being unusually quiet. Normally my grandpa would be watching TV downstairs, or my grandma would be in the kitchen, but that day there was just silence. I later found out they'd gone to run errands, leaving just my mom and me in the house. I got out of bed and headed down the hallway toward the kitchen, thinking I'd get myself a juice box. The hallway in our house was long and kind of dark, with this old wallpaper that had little flowers on it. The wooden floor creaked under my feet as I walked. I was about halfway down the hallway when I noticed something moving in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look, I froze completely. There was a woman coming through the wall, not walking through a doorway, literally emerging from the solid wall. At first, I thought it was my mom, but immediately realized it couldn't be. This woman was tall, really tall, like 6 or 7 feet, and she had this strange quality to her. She wasn't transparent exactly, but she looked faded somehow, like an old photograph where the colors have started to wash out, but I could still see her clearly enough. She had really pale skin, long dark brown hair that hung past her shoulders, and she wore this flowing white dress that went all the way to the floor. Around her head was this weird white band or crown thing that seemed to be woven into her hair. The scariest part wasn't even that she was coming through a wall, it was the way she looked at me. Her eyes locked onto mine immediately, and she just stared. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just stared with this intense focus that made my entire body go cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there as she stared at me for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or so. Then she started moving toward me. Not walking exactly. It was more like she was gliding across the floor. There were no footsteps, no sound at all. She just moved silently in my direction, her eyes never leaving mine. When she got close, she kind of knelt down, bringing her face level with mine. Her face was just inches away, and I remember noticing she had no smell. Living people always have some kind of smell. My mom's perfume, my grandpa's aftershave, my grandma's cooking. This woman had nothing. It was like she wasn't really there, except she was. Her face got closer and closer to mine, and I remember her eyes were this weird grayish blue color. They didn't look right, and then everything went black. Next thing I knew, I was lying on the living room couch with my mom, grandma, and grandpa all around me, looking worried. My mom was on the phone with someone, probably a doctor, and my grandma was pressing a cold cloth to my forehead. When they realized I was awake, they all started talking at once. From what I could piece together, my mom had woken up from her nap and found me unconscious on the hallway floor. My grandparents had come home around the same time, and they'd been trying to wake me for a while. I'd been out for between 2 and 3 hours. The doctor came and checked me over, saying it was probably just a fainting spell, maybe from low blood sugar or something, but I knew it wasn't that. I tried to tell them about the woman, but they all dismissed it as a dream I'd had right before fainting. My grandma said kids my age often couldn't tell the difference between dreams and reality. I stopped trying to convince them after a while, but I never forgot what I saw. For a few weeks after that, I refused to go down that hallway alone. My mom or grandparents had to walk with me, and I always kept my eyes fixed firmly ahead, never looking at the wall where she had appeared. Eventually, the fear faded enough that I could manage on my own again, but I always walked quickly through that section of the house. The second encounter happened when I was about 8 or 9. By then, I'd mostly put the first experience behind me, chalking it up to a weird childhood thing. It was a regular weeknight, and I was watching TV in the living room with my grandpa. My mom was working late, and my grandma was at her book club. During a commercial break, I remembered I'd left my homework folder upstairs in my mom's room earlier when I'd been showing her something. I ran upstairs to grab it, not wanting to miss much of the show. My mom's bedroom was at the end of the upstairs hallway, a big room with an old 4-poster bed in the center and windows overlooking the backyard. The door was partially open and I pushed it further to step inside. That's when I saw it, a small Jack Russell Terrier walking alongside my mom's bed. My first thought was simple confusion. We didn't have a dog. We'd never had a dog. My grandma was allergic, but there it was, clear as day. A small white and brown Jack Russell with a black patch around one eye, trotting along as if it belonged there. Like the woman from years before, it had that same faded quality, visible but somehow not fully solid. The weird thing was, I wasn't scared this time. Not at all. If anything, I felt weirdly calm, almost comforted by the dog's presence. I stood in the doorway watching as it sniffed around the edge of my mom's bed, then moved over to her dresser, exactly like a real dog would explore a room. Then it turned and saw me, its eyes locked with mine, and we just stared at each other. There was something so intelligent in its gaze, like it knew exactly who I was. We stayed that way for what seemed like 5 minutes. Me in the doorway, the spectral dog beside my mom's dresser, just looking at each other. Finally, the dog turned away and simply walked through the wall, the exterior wall that led outside, and then it was gone. I stood there for a moment, half expecting it to come back, but it didn't. I grabbed my homework folder and went back downstairs, not sure what to make of what I'd seen. Unlike the first time, I didn't tell anyone about the ghost dog. I knew they wouldn't believe me, and honestly, I wasn't upset about it. The experience had been almost nice. Definitely not frightening like the woman in the hallway. Years went by, and both experiences stayed with me. Though I rarely thought about them, I never saw either the woman or the dog again, despite living in that house until I left for college. Then, when I was about 17, my mom and I were going through some old boxes in the attic, looking for my baby photos for a school project. We found an old folder with documents related to the house, the deed, some renovation plans my grandparents had made, and a few other papers. "Did you know," my mom said casually as she flipped through them, "that before Grandma and Grandpa bought this place, it belonged to an old woman? She was in her 80s when she sold it to them." "No," I said, suddenly interested. "What was she like?" "I only met her once when we came to look at the house. She was tiny, all hunched over with age. Very proper lady. Always wore these old-fashioned dresses. Grandma said she'd lived here most of her adult life." My heart was beating faster now. Did she have a dog?" My mom looked surprised. "Yeah, actually. How did you know that?" "She had a little Jack Russell that followed her everywhere. She was really concerned about finding a family that would take care of her gardens after she was gone. I remember she seemed sad to leave this place." I felt a cold sensation spread through my body. "What happened to her?" "She moved to a nursing home, died about a year later from what I heard. The dog had already passed before she sold the house. That's part of why she was moving. Said the place was too empty without her companion." I wanted to tell my mom everything then, about the woman in the hallway and the dog in her bedroom, but something held me back. Instead, I just asked, "Do you have a picture of her?" "No, why would I?" Mom laughed. "That was over 20 years ago." I let it drop, but later that night I snuck back up to the attic and went through those house documents more carefully. In one folder, I found a black and white photograph that must have been taken in the 1940s or 50s. It showed a young woman standing in front of our house, smiling at the camera. She was tall and slender with dark hair, wearing a white summer dress. I knew immediately it was her, the woman I'd seen in the hallway. Not the elderly lady who'd sold the house to my grandparents, but her younger self from decades earlier. The woman in the photo wasn't wearing the white crown thing I remembered, but everything else matched. I'm 32 now and live in my own place in the city. My grandparents have both passed, and my mom sold the family home 5 years ago. I've never had another paranormal experience since those 2 childhood encounters. Sometimes I wonder what the woman in white wanted from me that day in the hallway. Was she trying to communicate something? Was she even aware I could see her? And why did I see the dog years later in such a different, more peaceful encounter? I've done some reading about paranormal theories over the years. Some say children are more sensitive to spirits. Others suggest that powerful emotions can imprint on a place. Maybe the elderly woman's sadness at leaving her beloved home or the loss of her dog. All I know for certain is what I saw. The tall woman in white emerging from my hallway wall, her intense stare, and years later, her faithful dog still making its rounds through a house it once called home. Story 20. I still have a hard time talking about this. It sounds so stupid when I try to explain it to people, like I'm some superstitious idiot who believes in curses or something. But I swear on everything I care about, this really happened, and it still freaks me out whenever I think about it. This was about 3 years ago when I was 16. We were living in Hamstone at the time. Not a tiny town, but not big either. Just your average middle American place where nothing interesting ever happens. My stepdad Mike had been with us for about 4 years by then. He's a good guy, works as a mover for this local company, which means he sometimes brings home random stuff people don't want anymore. One Friday, he came home with this painting. It was a canvas portrait of Marilyn Monroe, not like a poster or print, but an actual hand-painted thing, really colorful, kind of pop art style with bright yellows and pinks. Mike said he found it when they were clearing out this old lady's house who had passed away. Her kids didn't want it, so his boss said the movers could take whatever was getting tossed. I thought it was pretty cool. I've always liked vintage stuff, and even though I'm not like obsessed with Marilyn Monroe or anything, it was a nice piece of art. Mom, though, she had this weird reaction to it. She kind of frowned and said, "I don't think we need that in the house." Mike asked her what was wrong with it, and she just shrugged and said, "I don't know, I just don't like it." But she couldn't give a real reason, since Mom didn't want it. Mike offered it to me for my room. I was thrilled. My room was at the far end of our ranch-style house, and I'd been wanting to make it feel more grown up. The painting was perfect. I hung it right above my bed that same night, standing on my mattress to hammer in the nail. It looked awesome there against my light blue wall. That first night, God, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I went to bed around 11, normal for a Friday night. I fell asleep quickly, but then had the most horrible nightmare I can remember having in my life. In the dream, I was lying in my bed, just like in real life, when I felt the mattress start to sink, not like normal sinking, but like the entire bed was dropping through the floor. I couldn't move or scream, total sleep paralysis. The bed just kept sinking until it crashed through into our basement, which was directly below my room. In the dream, the basement was pitch black. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel something down there with me, something that wasn't human. The air felt thick and cold, and I could barely breathe. I finally managed to roll off the bed and started frantically feeling my way across the basement floor, trying to find the stairs. In our house, the basement stairs are on the opposite side from my room, so I had to cross the entire space. As I crawled across the concrete floor, I could hear something else moving in the darkness, something small, scuttling on what sounded like too many legs. It was following me. I could feel it getting closer, and the absolute terror I felt was unlike anything I've ever experienced. My chest was so tight, I thought I might actually die in my sleep. I eventually found the stairs and started climbing up on my hands and knees. When I reached the bottom step, there was this thin line of light coming from under the basement door at the top, and that's when I saw it, just for a split second, this small black thing on the floor behind me. It was maybe the size of a cat, but shaped all wrong. I only caught a glimpse before I woke up gasping and covered in sweat. I sat up in bed for like an hour after that, afraid to go back to sleep. I kept looking at my floor, half expecting to see it start to crack and give way. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just a stupid dream and managed to fall back asleep. But then I had another nightmare. This time I was trapped in my closet, and there were voices coming from inside my walls. The third nightmare that same night involved something watching me through my window, pressing its face against the glass until it started to crack. I woke up the next morning feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My mom asked if I was feeling okay because I looked terrible. I just told her I'd had bad dreams and left it at that. I didn't want to sound like a baby. The second night was even worse. The nightmares were more intense, more realistic. In one of them, I was lying in bed again when I felt something crawl onto the mattress from the foot of the bed. I could feel the weight of it moving up toward me, but I couldn't open my eyes or move. When it reached my chest, it felt like it was sitting there, getting heavier and heavier until I couldn't breathe. By the third day, I was a complete wreck. I'd had basically 3 nights of broken sleep filled with these terrifying dreams. I was jumping at shadows and felt constantly on edge. That's when I started to wonder if it had something to do with the painting. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I do. I'm not normally the type to believe in haunted objects or whatever. I've always considered myself pretty rational. But there was something about that painting that just felt wrong. When I looked at it during the day, it seemed fine. Just Marilyn's face smiling down at me. But in the dim light before bed, or when I glanced at it after waking from a nightmare, her smile looked different. Knowing. Like she was in on some joke I wasn't. That third day, I was sitting at the kitchen table, pushing cereal around my bowl when Mom asked me again if I was sick. I was so tired and scared that I just blurted it out, "I think it's the painting." She looked at me with this expression I couldn't read, not like she thought I was crazy, but more like she was considering it. "What do you mean?" she asked. I told her about the nightmares, how they started the exact night I hung up the painting, and how they were getting worse. I expected her to laugh or tell me I was being ridiculous, but she didn't. Instead, she suggested a test. We could move the painting to her and Mike's room for a night or two and see if anything changed. "If you're still having nightmares, then we know it's not the painting, she said. And if I start having nightmares. She didn't finish the sentence, but I could tell she was taking this more seriously than I expected. So that evening, we moved the painting to their room. Mom hung it on the wall opposite their bed. Mike thought we were both being silly, but he went along with it. I remember feeling nervous for Mom, but also relieved that the painting was out of my room. That night, I slept perfectly. No nightmares, no waking up in terror. I actually woke up feeling rested for the first time in days. I went to the kitchen expecting to find Mom making breakfast like usual, but she wasn't there. Mike told me she was still in bed, that she hadn't slept well. When she finally got up around noon, she looked exactly how I had felt for the past 3 days, exhausted and shaken. I asked her if she'd had nightmares, and she just nodded. She didn't want to talk about it at first, but later that day she told me. I dreamed about kittens, she said, which sounds harmless, but the way she described it made my skin crawl. In her dream, she was in a room full of kittens, but they were all sick and dying. They were covered in flies and she couldn't help them. She said the worst part wasn't the sight of them, but the overwhelming feeling of dread and wrongness that filled the room. She had 3 distinct nightmares that night, just like I had been having. The second night with the painting in their room, she had more. On the morning of the 3rd day, I came downstairs to find the painting leaning against the trash can in the garage. "It's going," was all Mom said when I asked about it. Mike tried to argue that it was just a coincidence, but Mom wouldn't hear it. She said the painting wasn't staying in our house another night. The nightmares stopped immediately for both of us after that. It was like flipping a switch. I slept better than I had in weeks. A few months later, I asked Mom what she'd done with the painting. She got this uncomfortable look on her face and admitted she'd put it in the trunk of her car, planning to drop it off at Goodwill. But she said every time she drove with it back there, she felt uneasy, like someone was watching her from the back seat. After a week, she couldn't stand it anymore. I drove to the other side of town and left it at the end of someone's driveway on trash day, she confessed. I know that's terrible, but I couldn't bring myself to donate it and pass it on to someone else. I asked her if she really thought the painting was, I don't know, haunted or something. She just shrugged and said, "I don't know what it was. I just know that there was something wrong with it." We've never bought another piece of second-hand art since then. Mike doesn't bring stuff home from work anymore either. Sometimes I still think about that painting, wonder where it ended up, if someone else took it home. And sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I still check my walls just to make sure there's nothing hanging above my bed. I've tried researching if paintings can somehow cause nightmares, if there's some chemical in old paint that could trigger hallucinations or something. I've found nothing that explains what happened. All I know is that for those 3 days, that painting of Marilyn Monroe turned my life into a waking nightmare, and to this day, I can't look at her image without feeling a chill run down my spine. Story 21. I've never told this to anyone outside my family before. Even writing it now, I'm sitting here with my hands shaking a bit. I'm 32 now, but the memories are still so vivid that sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I'm back there, in that house, hearing those footsteps again. We moved into that semi-detached house in Nottingham when I was 8. It was the summer of 1999, and I remember being excited about having a proper garden for the first time. The house itself wasn't anything special, just your typical British 2-bedroom with faded wallpaper from the 80s and carpet that had seen better days. My brother Tom and I shared the main bedroom while Mum took the smaller one. The unique thing about the house was the loft conversion. The previous owners had turned it into a proper room with an ensuite bathroom. It wasn't huge, but it had these weird sloped ceilings and a small window that looked out over the back garden. You accessed it through a door in our bedroom that opened to a narrow, creaky staircase. Dad moved in with us at first. Things between him and Mum were already tense, lots of late-night arguments that they thought we couldn't hear. He set up the loft as his office since he worked from home most days. I got used to hearing him up there, pacing back and forth while he was on phone calls. The floorboards would creak in this specific pattern, 3 steps toward the window, pause, then 4 steps back toward the bathroom. Sometimes he'd come thundering down those stairs when he was in a mood, and the whole house seemed to shake. After about 4 months, things between Mum and Dad got worse. There was a massive row one night, plates smashed, doors slammed. The next morning, Dad was gone. Mum sat us down and explained they were getting divorced. Dad moved to a flat across town, and we stayed in the house. That's when the weird stuff started. About a week after Dad left, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps in the loft. It was that exact same pattern. 3 steps toward the window, pause, 4 steps back. My first thought was that Dad had come back, maybe to get some of his things. I nudged Tom, but he was fast asleep. I lay there for ages, listening to those footsteps going back and forth, back and forth. The next morning, I asked Mum if Dad had been around. She got this weird look on her face and said no, he hadn't been back to the house since he left. I told her about the footsteps, and she just ruffled my hair and said it was probably just the house settling or the neighbors. Old houses make noises, she said. But it wasn't just once. It happened almost every night. I'd hear those footsteps pacing above our room, exactly like Dad used to do. Sometimes they'd stop abruptly, like someone had frozen in place, and then start up again a few minutes later. The creepiest part was when I'd hear footsteps coming down the stairs from the loft. The first few times, I genuinely thought it was Mum using the bathroom up there. She sometimes did because the ensuite was nicer than our main bathroom. I'd get up and open our bedroom door, expecting to see her coming down, but there was never anyone there, and the moment I opened the door to the loft stairs, the footsteps would stop completely. I started keeping track in a little notebook I hid under my mattress. The footsteps always began around 11:30 at night and would continue on and off until about 3 in the morning. They were loudest on Sunday nights for some reason. I tried telling Mum a few more times, but she was so stressed with the divorce and working extra shifts that she just didn't have the bandwidth to deal with it. She'd say things like, "It's just your imagination, Ollie," or "It's the house next door, sound carries through these walls." But I knew what I was hearing. Tom slept like a rock, so for a long time I thought I was the only one experiencing it. I started sleeping with my pillow over my head, trying to block out the sounds. Then, about 6 months after Dad left, things escalated. I was doing homework on my bed one evening when the door to the loft stairs slowly creaked open about an inch. I stared at it, frozen. There was no draft, no reason for it to move. As I watched, it opened wider, inch by inch, until it was halfway open. Then, slam! It banged shut with such force that my dinosaur poster fell off the wall. I ran downstairs and refused to go back to our room until Mum came up with me. She checked the door hinges and said it was probably just unbalanced. She wedged a doorstop under it and said that would solve the problem. It didn't. The next night, the doorstop was across the room and the door was open again. This became a regular occurrence. Sometimes the door would open and close several times in a row, like someone was playing with it. Other times it would open painfully slowly and then slam shut with incredible force. We had a cat named Milo, and he refused to come into our bedroom anymore. He'd sit at the doorway, tail puffed up, staring at the loft door. The worst experience, the one that still gives me nightmares, happened when I was 9, about a year after we'd moved in. It was a Saturday in October, and Mum needed to go shopping for groceries. Tom wanted to go with her to pick out some Halloween sweets, but I was in the middle of a new video game and begged to stay home. After some negotiation, Mum agreed to let me stay, promising they'd only be gone for an hour. This was before every kid had a mobile phone, so she just reminded me not to answer the door and to call our neighbor Mrs. Winters if I needed anything. I was playing my game in the living room downstairs, completely absorbed in it, when I heard it. Those footsteps in the loft, clearer than ever before. 3 steps, pause, 4 steps back. 3 steps, pause, 4 steps back. But this time, they were heavier, more deliberate. It sounded like someone was wearing boots up there, pounding on the floor. I turned up the volume on the TV, trying to drown it out, but the footsteps just got louder in response. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold, the loft door opening, and then, unmistakably, footsteps on the stairs coming down, slow, heavy steps, one by one. I was completely frozen. My hands were still holding the controller, but I couldn't move. The footsteps reached the bottom of the loft stairs, then continued across my bedroom floor. I could hear the specific creaky floorboard by Tom's bed groan under the weight. The footsteps paused at our bedroom door, and then I heard it open. Then more footsteps, coming down the main stairs now. Thud, thud, thud. Deliberately slow, like whatever it was wanted me to hear it coming. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the living room doorway, knowing that in seconds, whatever was making those footsteps would appear. The steps reached the bottom of the main stairs and then started moving across the hallway toward the living room. I could feel the vibrations through the floor. In complete panic, I did the weirdest thing. I started singing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" at the absolute top of my lungs. I don't know why. It was just the first thing that popped into my head. I was screaming it, really, over and over, with my eyes squeezed shut. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." The footsteps stopped right at the living room doorway. I could feel something there, watching me, but I kept singing, tears streaming down my face, rocking back and forth. Up above the world, so high, like a diamond in the sky. I don't know how long I sat there singing. It felt like hours. My throat was raw. And then suddenly the front door opened, and I heard Mum calling, "Ollie, we're home. They didn't have the cereal you like, so we..." She stopped when she saw me. I was still sitting there, controller in my lap, tears and snot all over my face, hoarsely croaking out the words to "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." I broke down completely when I saw her, sobbing uncontrollably. She held me for ages while I tried to explain what had happened. Tom stood in the doorway looking scared. Mum kept saying it was just my imagination, that I'd scared myself being home alone. That night, she let me sleep in her room. The next day, she called a locksmith to check the loft door, convinced it must be faulty. The locksmith found nothing wrong with it. She even had a heating engineer come to see if the pipes were causing the noises. Again, nothing unusual. Life went on. The footsteps continued. The door kept opening and slamming. I got used to it, in a way. I learned to ignore it, to tell myself it wasn't real, even when I knew it was. We lived in that house for 3 more years before Mum got a job in another city and we moved away. I never told anyone outside the family about what happened there. It sounded too crazy, too unbelievable. Then, when I was 21, Tom and I were having a few beers after Mum's birthday dinner. We got to reminiscing about old houses and neighborhoods, and I mentioned how glad I was to have left that house in Nottingham behind. "Because of the footsteps?" Tom asked quietly. "I nearly dropped my beer. You heard them too." Tom's face went completely white. He nodded slowly. "Every night. I thought I was going mad. I never said anything because I didn't want you to be scared." "I thought you slept through it all," I said. "I pretended to," he replied. I was terrified. We compared notes that night. Tom had heard exactly the same things I had. The pacing, the stairs, the door. He'd even seen the loft door open on its own once when I wasn't in the room. The strangest part of all. Tom told me that our neighbor, Mrs. Winters, mentioned something to him just before we moved. Apparently, the man who owned the house before us had died there, in the loft. He'd had a heart attack while working late one night. No one found him until morning. I've never been back to that house, and I never will. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear those 3 steps, pause, 4 steps back, and I still can't bring myself to sing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," not even to my own kids. I don't know what was in that house. I don't know if it was the previous owner or something else entirely. But I know what I heard, and I know it was real.